Hey guys, tonight we're taking a long, winding stumble through a city that smells like sewage, soot and cheap gin. Welcome to Georgian London, where the streets are caked in mud, the air is thick with coal smoke, and nearly every third person is either drunk, selling gin, or trying to survive the effects of it. It's not glamorous, it's not even remotely hygienic. But it is fascinating, and honestly, you probably won't survive this if you're expecting some genteel Bridgerton fantasy. Spoiler. Corsets and powdered wigs are about the least wild thing going on. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also tell me your city and what time you're listening. I love knowing where in the world you are as we travel back together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is somewhere around 1720, and England is having a full-blown identity crisis. The dust has barely settled from the Glorious Revolution, the Act of Union is still fresh ink, and the Georgian era is tiptoeing in with a mix of powdered grandeur and growing urban chaos. London, in particular, is bloated and bursting, its population swelling with rural migrants looking for jobs, food, and anything to dull the despair. Enter gin, that's just the botanical hand-labelled small batch artisan stuff you sip with cucumber slices today. No, this gin is raw, harsh, and probably flammable. It's sold on street corners, in alleyways, out of baby bottles, and by women with 2 teeth and a terrifying sales pitch. For the working poor, it's cheaper than beer, easier to find than clean water, and effective at doing exactly what it promises, obliterating reality for a few hours. You smell it before you see it. A sharp medicinal tang laced with something vaguely industrial. You turn the corner of a muddy cobbled lane and there it is. A crooked wooden sign that says, "Drunk for a penny, dead drunk for twopence." If you can't walk home, no problem. They'll wheelbarrow you into the street and leave you there until morning. It's hard to overstate how deeply gin claws into the bloodstream of Georgian London. It isn't just a drink, it's an escape hatch. Imagine working 16 hours hauling coal or gutting fish at Billingsgate Market, or sewing your fingers bloody for pennies in a candlelit room the size of a wardrobe. Now imagine someone hands you a cup of something that makes the hunger fade, the cold disappear, and the screaming baby you haven't fed in 2 days go quiet. That's what gin offers, and people take the offer over and over again. A fun fringe fact for you. The first wave of gin popularity was actually encouraged by the government. Yep, around the turn of the 18th century, Parliament passed laws that made it easier for regular people to distill spirits, mostly to undercut French brandy and support British grain farmers. It was a sort of patriotic intoxication plan. The unintended result? A tsunami of unregulated backyard booze with no safety checks and zero quality control. You want gin made with turpentine and sulfuric acid? Because that's how you get gin made with turpentine and sulfuric acid. So here you are, someone just like you, but 300 years ago, standing in a neighbourhood that would later become Soho, watching a line of desperate souls snake toward a woman selling gin by the ladle. Her child is swaddled in rags and sleeping in a gin barrel. The customers range from fishwives to ex-soldiers, rag pickers to chimney sweeps. One man has a bandaged face. Another doesn't seem to know where his shoes are, or that he ever had any. A young girl, maybe 12, is laughing hysterically at something no one else can see. And yet there's a strange sort of camaraderie in the madness. Gin joints double as meeting places, escape rooms, dens of intimacy where the city's noise is temporarily muffled by the roar inside your skull. If pubs are where men go to debate politics, then gin shops are where the working class goes to forget that politics even exist. Not everyone is thrilled. Moralists, clergymen and early social reformers are already starting to sweat. They don't know the half of it yet. Things will get much worse, but they see the signs. Infants abandoned in ditches, women selling their bodies for another drink, men dropping dead in the gutter, limbs twisted, mouths open in mid-snore. The reformers start writing pamphlets with names like "The Downfall of the Drunken Wretch" and "Hell's Emissary in a Bottle." But pamphlets don't stand a chance against a buzz this cheap. There's one open debate that still buzzes among historians. Was the gin craze really as bad as we think? Some argue the numbers were wildly inflated by panicked elites. Hogarth's art, for example, famously exaggerated the horror for dramatic effect. Others believe the social decay was even worse than the records show, but but underreported because no one wanted to admit how far things had fallen. The truth, as usual, is probably sloshing somewhere in the middle. As night falls, the city doesn't sleep. It staggers. You hear shouting, a bottle shattering, laughter that turns to weeping, then back to laughter again. Somewhere a woman sings a song with no tune. Somewhere else a baby wails, ignored. And through it all, the smell of juniper and rot hangs in the air like a fog you can never quite wipe from your nose. You lean against a wall just outside a gin shop, feeling your breath fog the October chill. The building is crooked. The people are crooked. Even time feels warped here, drunken and spinning. But this is only the beginning, because you haven't met the home distillers yet, or the toothless landladies mixing in laudanum, or the kids who grew up thinking gin was food. No worries, you will. The first thing you notice about gin isn't the taste, it's the burn, a kind of back-of-the-throat sear that feels like swallowing liquid fire, only dirtier. The second thing? The way your whole body loosens just moments after. Your knees stop aching. Your belly growls a little quieter. The street noise fades to a low, cosy hum, like bees behind a curtain. That's the thing about gin in this era. It promises warmth in a world that offers so little of it. But here's the part they don't tell you in the pamphlets. This stuff wasn't exactly made in gleaming copper stills. No botanical infusions or careful temperature control. The gin you're holding in this battered tin mug might have been distilled in someone's laundry basin, using barley that had gone mouldy weeks before. It might have been cut with turpentine or alum to give it more kick. You'd never know. No one cared. You follow the scent of hot yeast and something more metallic into the heart of the slums, where back-alley stills clatter all night long like rusted clockwork. You pass a half-collapsed warehouse with planks nailed across the doors, though the smoke rising from its chimney says it's very much in business. Children run in and out with pails of murky liquid, their shoes falling apart, their hands raw from handling barrels. They work the pumps and ladle in ingredients, which sometimes include sugar, spoiled grain, pepper, or even dead rats fished from the Thames. Accidentally, hopefully. There's no formal training, no hygiene codes, no adult supervision either. Just knowledge passed down like a grim family recipe. Boil this, mash that, strain whatever solids you find floating near the top. The fire's too hot, doesn't matter. The mash has gone green, toss it in. People will drink it anyway. You duck under a sheet of dangling laundry and into one of these backyard distilleries. Inside, the air is thick. Part sour yeast, part coal smoke, part wet dog. A kettle, dented and scorched black, sits crookedly on a fire. Beside it, a woman, barefoot, sleeves rolled, stirs kettle with a stick that looks suspiciously like a chair leg. Her daughter, maybe 10 years old, is measuring powder into small cloth bags. That's not sugar, that's something else. Maybe saltpeter, maybe lime. You don't ask. This is where mother's ruin is born. The phrase catches on in this period, and not just because of the drink's effect on women. It's more metaphorical than that. Gin becomes the scapegoat for every social ill people can't explain. Crime must be the gin. Poverty, blame gin. Dead baby in the alley. Well, what did you expect? Letting women drink that poison? Never mind that the economy was collapsing or that 10 people were living in one damp room. Gin is a neat villain, and it's everywhere. But here's the twist. Women aren't just drinking it. They're making it, selling it, profiting from it. In a time when few legal jobs exist for the working class woman, distilling gin at home is one of the few ways to earn a living. Sure, it's frowned upon, but so is starving to death. You'd be surprised how easily one outweighs the other. Some women even become gin tycoons in their neighbourhoods, matriarchs of backyard booze empires. They have networks, regular customers, and territorial disputes with rivals. Sometimes they cut deals with constables, sometimes they bribe them with free gin. If you walk down the street with a bottle tucked under your apron and a few pennies to spare, no one asks questions. In fact, people probably assume you're someone important. A quirky historical footnote: some distillers, desperate to give their gin that eye-watering punch, would add oil of vitriol, what we now call sulfuric acid. Just a few drops, they claimed, gave it that bracing quality. The customers, if they noticed their tongues blistering or their vision swimming, they didn't say much. Might have just thought it was a particularly strong batch. At one point there are over 7,000 private gin cellars in London alone. That's nearly 1 for every 100 residents. You could go door to door with a tin cup and get a different blend at each stop. Some serve it warm, some cold, some spiced, some sour. None of it is regulated. and even the distillers can't always remember what went into yesterday's barrel. But as this fiery liquid flows, something else begins to change in the city's bloodstream. People become quicker to anger. Fights break out more often. A baby is found with blue lips in a cradle soaked with spilled gin. A young man raves in the street, his hands trembling from withdrawal. The reformers scream about it. The upper classes wrinkle their powdered noses, and yet the stills keep boiling. There's a strange scholarly debate that keeps surfacing in modern research. Were people really more drunk back then, or just more visible in their drunkenness? Today, you might stumble out of a club at 2 a.m. and get into an Uber. Back then, you collapsed in a puddle and hoped a passing stranger didn't rob you blind. Visibility shaped the narrative. Gin was blamed for every crime, every scandal, every baby left crying. But was it always gin? Or was it just the perfect scapegoat? You crouch behind a row of barrels as two men argue over a debt. One smashes the other across the face with a pewter tankard. Blood sprays, dark and quick. No one intervenes. The distiller keeps stirring. The girl keeps bagging powder. The air smells like copper and coal. The fight ends when one man stumbles out, the other slumped beside the fire. You finally step back out into the cool night air, your clothes now soaked with smoke and God knows what else. And still, even now, you see another line forming across the alley. More people with coin, hope or desperation in their eyes. There's no shortage of customers. Not tonight. Not for years. Gin has taken root. Not in the fancy parlours of Westminster or the oak-panelled halls of academia, but here in the backyards and broken kitchens of the forgotten. In mothers who can't sleep. In fathers who gave up. In children who think this is just how life is. It isn't elegant. It isn't noble. But it is very, very real. You wake up slumped against a rotting doorframe, jaw stiff, mouth dry, and your head filled with what feels like a marching band made entirely of broken pots and tin spoons. The alley is quieter now. A pale grey dawn rolls over the rooftops, and the city stirs like a hungover beast trying to remember what it did the night before. A mangy dog sniffs your boot and then moves on. Somewhere nearby, someone retches into a drain. You stagger into motion, brushing cobwebs and soot off your coat, or at least what's left of it. Your feet shuffle past broken glass, charred matchsticks, and a splatter that you really, really hope is just last night's spilled gin. As you pass a corner, you spot a familiar scene. A group of children, not playing, not laughing, not even talking, just sitting in a line against the wall, passing around a cracked jug. This is where the story gets darker. Because it's not just adults hooked on the stuff now, kids are in on it too. In a world with no cartoons, no candy stores, and definitely no social services, children grow up fast. And by fast, we mean they start drinking gin at 7, 8, maybe younger, if their mum's hands are shaking too much to hold the ladle herself. You'd think the burn would put them off, but when you've never had anything else, when hunger gnaws and warmth is rare, liquid fire is a comfort, not a deterrent. You follow one of the kids, a thin boy with a twitch in his left eye, into what passes for home. It's a single room, tucked behind a rag merchant's stall, walls sweating damp. Inside, his older sister is tending a still. Yes, a still. Right there, next to the bed where 3 younger siblings sleep curled like cats under a coat. She grinds something with a pestle. Not botanicals, though. This isn't a science. It's survival. In this part of town, almost every household either drinks gin, makes gin, or sells gin. Sometimes all 3. It's like breathing, only with more liver failure. Even children are part of the economy now, running errands, carrying barrels, or distracting the watchmen with stories while their parents roll kegs down alleyways. There's no school bell to call them away, and no future bright enough to lure them toward books instead of barrels. And here's the terrifying thing. Gin isn't even illegal. Not yet. No one's really trying to stop any of this. Not seriously, not in a way that matters. Sure, reformers preach and pamphlets circulate, but in these neighbourhoods, literacy is a luxury and so is morality. Survival doesn't wait for policy. There's a particularly notorious substance floating around at this point in history. Parliament gin. No, it's not official. It's just what people call the stuff sold under the nose of the law. It's usually homemade, barely filtered, and stored in barrels that once held anything from fish guts to floor polish. Some distillers flavour it with bits of juniper or sawdust, depending on what they've got. There are even rumours of gin laced with opiates, belladonna, or crushed glass to give it that extra kick. Whether true or not, it's a reminder. When there are no rules, anything goes. You spot another makeshift gin shop as the sun climbs. This one operates out of a laundry yard. The washing lines flap with shirts stiff from old soap and rain. Beneath them, a large pot bubbles away on a fire, and a man you'd mistake for a blacksmith ladles clear liquid into jugs. His daughter, no older than 9, is collecting coins and making change with a grim efficiency that suggests she's done this every day for years. A constable walks past, doesn't even slow down. Here's where it gets strange. This wide-open, no-holds-barred gin production boom, this chaos, wasn't some accident of governance. It was policy. Back in 1690, the government passed laws making it super easy for anyone to distill spirits at home. Their logic: support British grain farmers and undercut those snobby French with their brandy and wine. It worked, for grain sales, for nationalism, for everything except public health. Now it's spiralled. By the 1720s and 30s, entire slums are functioning on gin the way a body functions on blood. If you're a regular worker, your wages can't buy much bread, but they can buy enough gin to forget you're starving. And if you're a child, it's the same deal. You can't afford a pair of shoes, but you can afford a ladle full of mother's homebrew. One quirky detail historians like to throw around: gin was sometimes flavoured with sulphuric acid because it created a heat in the throat that felt like potency. Some drinkers believed the more it burned, the better it worked. Of course, it also stripped the lining from your esophagus. But hey, people were tough, or at least too poor to be picky. There's an open debate among scholars even now. Did the gin craze create a culture of childhood alcoholism, or was it simply a grim necessity that helped keep kids alive in a brutal world? Some argue that children only drank gin in small doses, as medicine or comfort. Others point to reports of young kids staggering, vomiting, even dying from overconsumption. The truth probably varies by street, by household, by what day of the week it was, but there's no denying this. Children were in it deep. As you wind your way back out into the main streets, you pass a baby carriage tipped over in the mud. There's no baby inside, just a bottle, half full. A woman nearby is singing, her eyes closed, face flushed. She might be the mother, she might not, no one's watching, no one stops to check. The crowd flows around her like she's just another street post. Back in the shop fronts, you see bottles for sale next to eggs, fabric and soap. Signs say things like cures all ills and guaranteed to warm the soul. Some of these shops even offer flavour choices: turpentine, pepper or juniper surprise. You do not ask what the surprise is. And above all this noise, the children keep moving, dirty faces, quick fingers, fast legs. They know the gin world better than anyone. They know how to measure a shot, how to stir a mash, how to pretend a customer isn't dead until the coins are out of his pocket. This is their normal. You head back toward the edge of town, your boots soaked through and your brain fogged again. You think of the little girl counting pennies in the laundry yard, the boy with the twitch, the baby carriage in the mud. Somewhere are bell tolls. Not for school, not for church, just to signal that another hour has passed in a city drunk not just on gin, but on forgetfulness. You take a turn onto Broad Street just as the sun punches through a rip in the clouds, casting the cobblestones in light so sharp it only makes the grime more visible. Horse dung, puddles thick as soup, a rat darting between crates. London in the Georgian era, and this particular stretch of street is one of the busiest, loudest and drunkest parts of the city. If gin is the bloodstream of Georgian London, this is one of its thudding arteries. You walk with your head down, instinctively dodging a man staggering sideways, mumbling what might be a hymn or a curse. Behind you, a woman is yelling at a toddler. Not words, just raw sound. You pass 2 sailors in an argument that escalates into a sloppy brawl, fists flying with the aimless rhythm of men too inebriated to land a punch. A cart squeals by, narrowly missing you, its driver flicking the reins with one hand and drinking from a jug with the other. This is the street life during the gin craze. Unfiltered, unsupervised, and completely chaotic. There's no real separation between public and private here. Your drinking, your business, your collapse, they all happen out in the open. Stoops, steps, thresholds. These are where people nap, shout, vomit, and weep. You can trace a person's entire night just by following the trail of broken bottles and discarded shoes. And the noise, dear God, the noise. Clanging pans, street hawkers calling out their wares, kids yelling, dogs barking, and always, always someone singing. Usually off-key. Usually a gin ballad, half finished and half remembered. The city never really sleeps. It just slows down slightly around 4 a.m, then ramps up again before the sun can blink. You pass one of the newer establishments popping up on corners like mushrooms after rain. A gin shop. Not a pub, not a tavern, not a cosy inn. This is a place with one product, one purpose, to get you drunk quickly and cheaply. Inside, there's no seating, no decor, just barrels, a counter, and maybe a couple of stools if you're lucky. You hand over a penny, get your gin, and stand there to drink it. If you pass out, they drag you to the gutter and keep serving the next in line. The name on the sign? The Pissing Devil. You don't want to know the story behind that, trust me. And yet, these shops are everywhere. Some operate from actual buildings, others are run out of windows, with little tin funnels poking out like thirsty snouts. One woman, notorious across the neighbourhood, sells her gin from a teapot. She sits in a rocking chair with 3 cats and offers a drink for a halfpenny, or a full cup if you'll listen to her monologue about how she once danced with a viscount. Is it true? Who cares? You find yourself in the heart of the slums now, and the buildings are leaning like drunks themselves. The walls warped from decades of rain and neglect. Upper stories jut over the street, threatening to kiss their neighbours. From the windows, people shout conversations across alleyways, toss down slop buckets, or, more often, just sit and stare, expressionless, like ghosts who forgot to move on. One of the most disturbing sights you encounter is a man slumped beside a barrel, his eyes open but unfocused. You check, yes, breathing, barely. A child walks by and kicks his shoe, not out of malice, just boredom. The man doesn't flinch. Above him, scrawled on the wall in chalk, drunk for a penny, dead drunk for 2, clean straw free. You want to laugh, but it doesn't feel funny anymore. You duck into a pub just to get your bearings. This one's older, more traditional. There's a fireplace, a few wobbly stools, even something resembling a menu. But even here, gin dominates. The barkeep has a face like boiled meat and paws with a practiced flick. He doesn't look up when a man collapses halfway to the door. 2 other patrons drag him into the corner. Business as usual. You overhear snippets of conversation. A woman bragging about how her gin cured her child's cough. A man selling counterfeit Dutch drops to flavour the worst batches. Someone else muttering about putting turpentine in their mix, just a splash for clarity. You make a mental note not to drink anything ever again, and here's a twist. Some of these gin joints are run by respectable folks. Former butchers, bakers, widows, even the occasional clergyman's sister. Because the profit margin is just that good. People drink more than they eat, and as far as business goes, gin is recession-proof. Plague. People drink, frost fair, drink, inflation, drink harder. One strange historical tidbit. Some shops would advertise drunk in 10 minutes or your money back. Of course, if you weren't drunk in 10 minutes, you'd just order more, and by then you were well on your way to forgetting you even had money in the first place. There's a debate among historians about whether gin shops were truly the moral plague they were painted to be, or whether they were just easy scapegoats for a society already crumbling under the weight of urbanisation, poverty, and inequality. Some argue these places offered more than just booze. They were warm, social, safer than the streets. Others say they turned people into zombies. Maybe both are true. Back outside, you dodge a woman trying to sell you a miracle tonic that smells suspiciously like boot polish. 2 men roll a barrel past you, singing a sea shanty, laughing at nothing. A little girl darts by, holding a bottle almost as tall as she is. You can't tell if she's delivering it or drinking it. Maybe both. As the day wears on, you start to feel it again. That looseness in your spine, the itchy numbness behind your eyes, gin in the air, in your lungs, in your blood. The city pulses around you, fast, loud, careless, and yet you're starting to see how it works, the rhythm of it, the rules. This isn't just drinking, it's living on the edge of oblivion over and over again, because the only thing worse than forgetting for a while is remembering everything. You find a step to sit on. It's still wet, but you don't care. Behind you, someone laughs so hard they choke. In front of you, a stray dog lifts its leg on a crate of empty bottles, and around you, the endless tide of gin-soaked souls rolls on. London doesn't stop. It staggers forward, glass in hand. You can't really talk about the gin craze without talking about desperation. Not the performative kind you see in costume dramas, with a sad violin swell and a single tear sliding down a powdered cheek, but raw, bone-deep, stomach-turning desperation, the kind that scrapes away choices until the only ones left are drink or collapse. You see it everywhere now, in every lean face and shaking hand, and it starts to dawn on you. This isn't just a city hooked on gin. This is a city medicating itself. You duck into a shadowy courtyard tucked between tenement blocks, the brick walls sweat-stained and weeping mildew. A woman with a shawl over her head is crouched by a bucket, rinsing something that might be clothes or might be intestines, hard to say. Her eyes flick toward you, then away. Next to her, an old man is huddled on a crate, sipping gin from a chipped mug with two hands like he's holding communion. A child naps in a pile of straw under a coat, and you realise this is not some isolated pit of misery. This is life for the vast majority of working-class Londoners. It's easy now to see why gin took hold so fast. At the time, the city's economy is a brutal joke. Wages have stagnated, bread is expensive, and industrialisation is starting to nibble at the edges of labour. Factories want faster workers for fewer pence. Craftsmanship is dying. The lucky ones get sixpence a day. The unlucky ones get sick or injured and never work again. No social safety net. No workers' compensation. Just bad luck and a landlord who still wants his rent. Gin, though, that's cheap. 1 penny gets you warm, 2 pennies gets you numb, and if you're lucky, 3 gets you so far gone you forget your stomach's been empty since yesterday. It's not just about drinking, it's a daily strategy. People drink to sleep through the coldie, they drink to stretch a crust of bread into a meal. They drink to soften the blow when another child doesn't wake up. There's a man who works down at the docks who tells you this through yellow teeth and breath like a bonfire. He's missing 2 fingers and calls gin his hand warmer. Says it makes the mornings bearable, the aches quieter, the shouting in his head less noticeable. He doesn't drink to get drunk, he drinks to feel normal. And there are thousands more like him. Men who get up before dawn and swing hammers or push carts for 12 hours and end the day with their faces in a puddle, only to do it again the next. You pass a house, though house is generous, more like a box built out of warped wood and bricked in regret. Inside you can hear a couple arguing. It's muffled at first, but then something smashes, and the shouting sharpens. There's crying too. A baby, a woman, hard to say. You don't stop, no one does. That's just part of the neighbourhood soundtrack now. And this too is the legacy of gin. Not just addiction, but erosion, of relationships, of stability, of what little community existed before the drink flooded in. Men beat their wives. Wives abandon their infants. Neighbours rob each other just to afford another bottle. It's not always violent, but it is always raw. People who once looked out for each other now guard their bottles and their coins like wolves. One thing that surprises you is just how many women are among the heavy drinkers. By modern standards, you'd call them alcoholics, but back then, they're just surviving. Many are widows or single mothers trying to raise 3 or 5 or 9 kids on pennies. Gin takes the edge off hunger, fear, cold, grief. If you're a mother who's lost 2 children in a year to disease and another to starvation, what's one more drop going to do? There's a famous case that keeps popping up in the gossip of the time. A woman named Judith Dufour. She left her child in a workhouse, then picked her up one day and returned the next without her. When asked, she said she'd found other uses for the child's clothes. In fact, she'd sold them to buy gin, then strangled the child and dumped the body in a ditch. Her story was printed in every newspaper and sermon pamphlet, passed around as proof of gin's evil. People clutched their pearls, but behind the horror was a simpler truth. Judith didn't snap because of gin. She snapped because life gave her no other tools. The gin just made her forget she had a conscience. That's the fringe of the fringe, the rare horror stories that everyone clings to. But most of the time it's quieter than that, more like neglect. A mother forgets to boil water for her baby's oats. A father leaves the door open, and the child wanders into the street. A little boy lights a candle too close to the drapes while his parents are passed out. These aren't headlines, but they happen every day, and it's not just the poor either. You see more and more middle-class folks dipping their toes in, servants, shopkeepers, even a few clerks and apprentice solicitors. They drink discreetly, of course, usually with flavoured gin or medicinal tonics, but they drink. The difference is, they do it behind closed doors, with polished glasses and decent lighting, so no one panics, at least not yet. There's still debate today about whether gin was truly to blame for the poverty spiral of the time, or just a symptom of something much larger. Was it the disease, or just the fever? One theory says that gin simply filled the vacuum left by a collapsing support system. People didn't get hooked because they were morally weak. They got hooked because the world offered them nothing else. A warm drink is better than a cold truth, after all. As dusk begins to settle, the alleys fill up again. Children return with jugs wrapped in cloth. Mothers argue with neighbours about who owes whom. Men lean against walls and pass bottles wordlessly. Someone plays a fiddle badly, and someone else sings a line of a bawdy song before coughing so hard they spit blood. You pause for just a moment and realise something chilling. You don't even flinch anymore. The screaming, the smells, the collapse, it's all started to feel normal. Which, of course, is the final stage of any good societal breakdown. And somewhere in the darkening haze, a boy no older than 7 offers to sell you a shot of really good stuff for a farthing. You ask him what's in it, he grins. Don't know, he says, but it's strong. You follow the boy a few steps out of sheer curiosity, though part of you already knows what you're in for. He leads you through a narrow passageway, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, the wall so close you feel the grime brush your coat. He ducks under a rope hung with undergarments stiff from repeated rinses in cold soapy water, and gestures toward a cellar door already cracked open. Tell her I sent you, he says, with a gap-toothed grin, before darting off into the gloom. Inside, it's like stepping into another dimension, somewhere between a pantry, a closet, and the last circle of hell. The room is lit by a single candle that's burned halfway into a bottle. A woman, possibly in her 40s but weathered into something older, stands behind a crate turned into a counter. Her hair is wild, pinned loosely with broken combs, and her eyes have that shine, the kind of glassiness that either comes from crying too much or drinking too long. You can't tell which, possibly both. She nods at you, gestures to a row of earthenware jugs, and says, "You want it clean, hot, or with a bite?" You ask what with a bite means. "Turpentine," she says flatly, as if it's a condiment. And this, perhaps more than anything, explains why gin spread through every corner of Georgian society like ink in water. It isn't just that it's strong or cheap or everywhere, it's that you get choices. It gives people, especially women, a strange sort of control in a life where everything else is dictated by men, by class, by luck, and by laws written in buildings they'll never enter. Back on the street you head toward the markets where the working class blends into the serving class, and the invisible lines between respectable and ruined blur completely. Here, the real twist starts to show itself. It's not just the poor anymore. The craze is creeping up the ladder. You pass a row of homes, not mansions, not hovels, but neat brick buildings with iron gates and lace curtains, and you hear laughter coming from behind the shutters, high-pitched, slightly shrill, a little too loud. A housemaid stumbles out the front door, cheeks flushed, giggling as she swats at a stable boy who says something too crude to repeat. In her hand, a small decorative bottle with a silk ribbon tied around the neck. Artisan gin. The middle class has arrived at the party. It's not public drunkenness, not yet. That's still seen as disgraceful. But inside kitchens and parlours, among governesses and tailors' wives, gin is gaining popularity in quieter, subtler ways. Sometimes they call it a nightcap. Sometimes it's for nerves. Sometimes it's just a splash in the tea that turns into a pour. There's no frothing panic yet. No one is collapsing in alleyways with a corset half undone. But the signs are there. Empty bottles hidden behind flour sacks. Red eyes in morning church services. Griffins sent out with a coin and a wink. And when it comes to the clergy, things get weirder still. There's a vicar known in Holborn who swears that a dram of gin sharpens the soul. Says it makes his sermons livelier, his pen more inspired. He keeps a bottle under the pulpit and takes a swig between hymns. Congregants think he's sickly. He's not. He's just found a more socially acceptable way to cope with how miserable everyone is. You start to see how gin becomes a kind of equalizer. It's the one thing that connects a toothless fishwife and a bored seamstress, a war veteran and a butler, a laundress and her lady employer. The doses are different, sure. The vessels, mugs for the poor, delicate glassware for the middle class, change the optics. But the purpose is the same. Escape. One fun little fact from the fringe of history. Some high society ladies actually hosted gin teas as a kind of risque afternoon amusement. Served in china cups with a slice of lemon, perhaps even infused with herbs to make it seem medicinal. It was a rebellion in lace gloves, a giggle behind a fan, and they'd never admit they were following the habits of the very poor. But they were. They absolutely were. And just like that, Gin shifts from a street corner vice into something resembling fashion. Recipes appear in periodicals, doctors begin prescribing it for things like hysteria, cramps and female melancholy. Apothecaries start carrying tinctures that are 90% gin, with a hint of lavender or wormwood or crushed rhubarb. Of course, they don't advertise the gin part. They call it a medicated cordial, but everybody knows. Now, this is where the scholarly debates kick in again. Some argue that the gin craze was never truly about the drink. It was about modernity. The city was changing, fast and ruthlessly, and people were caught between the old rural rhythms and the new urban chaos. Gin became a cultural shock absorber. Others say that's reading too much into it, that it really was just mass addiction, and trying to dress it up as symbolism only lets the real damage off the hook. But it's hard to ignore how the spread follows the cracks in society. Wherever there's pressure, economic, emotional, social, gin seeps in like water through stone. It's not just about intoxication, it's about insulation. You head toward a little park square now, one of the few bits of green in the sprawl of cobbled grey. There's a nursemaid on a bench, rocking a pram with her foot sipping from a silver flask. Next to her, a printer's apprentice sits cross-legged, eyes glazed. There's no screaming here, no brawls, just quiet unravelling. And in some ways it's more chilling, because when the chaos becomes polite, you know it's digging deeper. The night returns slowly, swallowing the city in soot-coloured shadows. Lamps are lit, one by one, flickering through fog. Behind curtained windows, another cup is poured, another laugh too loud, another moment forgotten. And you, standing in the middle of it all, start to understand that this isn't a phase. It's not a wild weekend or a generational hiccup. This is something much bigger. This is a city quietly losing its grip, one careful sip at a time. The city has a smell tonight. A thick blend of damp stone, coal smoke, sweat, rotting food, and, of course, gin. It hangs in the air like a second skin, soaking into your clothes, your throat, your very thoughts. You walk slowly down a narrow street just off Holborn, the kind of road you'd miss if you blinked. It's quieter here, less shouting, more shuffling. Shadows lean heavily against the crooked buildings. You can hear the occasional hiccup or groan, the soft clink of bottles being restacked. Or maybe stolen. And then you see it. A wall, scorched in places, tagged with old chalk messages and plastered dead centre with a woodcut print. Gin Lane. You've heard of it before, William Hogarth's infamous engraving. A moral warning turned cultural time capsule. The drawing has circulated everywhere, copied and recopied, a visual sermon in ink. It's meant to shock, and standing here now, surrounded by people who are the drawing come to life, it does. You lean in, squinting at the details. A skeletal mother, eyes rolled back, sits on a stair, dropping her baby over a railing as she sways, blissfully unaware. Around her, chaos blooms, men collapsing, women fighting, a child gnawing on a bone, a man hanging in the background from a gibbet. In one corner, a barber sells teeth extraction next to a gin vendor offering another kind of relief. The whole thing is grotesque, absurd, and yet achingly familiar. You turn your head and see the real version just across the alley. A woman, gaunt and ragged, is laughing at nothing while her toddler toddles dangerously close to the open edge of a sewer grate. A man is lying face down in the mud with his hand still clutching a bottle, as if even unconsciousness won't loosen his grip. A half-blind beggar is singing a song to no one in particular, off-key, tuneless, but with surprising joy. The image and the reality blur until you can't tell which is the copy. Hogarth's Gin Lane wasn't fiction. It was reportage, satire sharpened into a warning. And if anything, the real thing is worse, because it smells like waste and regret, and you can hear it sobbing. Back in 1751, when Hogarth released the engraving, he paired it with another, Beer Street. That one showed happy workers, healthy families, and a world powered by the good drink of England, beer. It was tidy propaganda, sure, but also a rallying cry. Reformers took it and ran, shoving the image into every pamphlet, sermon and newspaper. Gin became the villain with a face. And that face looked disturbingly like the one staring back at you from behind a cracked window right now. That woman? She's missing most of her teeth. She is wearing 3 layers of rags and humming a tune that might have once been a lullaby. Her child is asleep in a crate next to her, a bottle resting between his tiny knees like a comfort toy. She notices you watching. Her eyes narrow, not with shame, but with defiance. Like she knows what you're thinking and she's already heard it before. "What's it to you?" she spits, then looks away. You feel a wave of nausea, not from the gin fumes or the mud, but from the realization that this isn't some rare sight. This is the street. This is just a Thursday night in the middle of the city. And the people still walking by? They don't even glance. They've seen this scene 1,000 times in dozens of alleys, and the horror wore off years ago. A fun, if grim, fringe fact. Some people were so affected by Hogarth's engraving that they claimed to see actual demons in the eyes of gin drinkers. There were rumours of gin madness, a kind of possession, where women would speak in tongues, or men would laugh uncontrollably before throwing themselves into the Thames. Scholars later called it mass hysteria, but at the time, no one really knew where the line between madness and intoxication ended. And it wasn't just about art. Gin Lane triggered real fear, and that fear became fuel for Parliament. Within months of its publication, new laws were proposed. Taxes, licences, penalties. Hogarth had drawn what they already knew, but he made it impossible to ignore. Still, there's some scholarly back and forth about whether Gin Lane helped or hurt. Some historians argue that the sheer horror of it may have exaggerated the problem, turning every drunk into a monster and every poor mother into a negligent villain. It flattened the narrative, turned tragedy into caricature. Others believe that without such imagery, Parliament would have continued to ignore the collapse happening in the real time. Either way, the engraving left a mark that's still being debated centuries later. You step over a discarded print of the same image. Someone must have dropped it after a sermon or speech. The paper's soggy now, torn at the corners, soaked with what might be rain or might be gin. Fitting, really. No one wants to look too long. Even the moral messages get left behind. As you move away from the wall, you pass a woman spoon-feeding gin to a crying infant. She does it gently, like it's medicine, and in her mind it is. The child stops wailing after the second sip. Eyes flutter, then close. The woman sighs in relief and leans back against the wall, bottle clinking softly against the brick. It's a hard moment to watch, not because it's shocking anymore, but because it isn't. You feel the weight of it, how this city has normalised 1,000 tiny tragedies into background noise. Every street, every alley, every home is its own version of Gin Lane. Not just the engraving, the whole city is an open-air print, updating itself every minute with more pain. And yet, there's laughter somewhere. A drunken couple dancing badly to a tune only they can hear. A cluster of boys rolling dice and shouting insults. A girl balancing a bottle on her head to applause. Even in this wasteland, there are flashes of joy. Feral joy, sure, but joy nonetheless. Because people, despite it all, are still people. You glance one last time at the print on the wall. You swear the mother's eyes follow you. But maybe it's just your guilt catching up. As you turn the corner and disappear into the dark, the baby cries again, softer this time. Or maybe it's just the wind. The next day you decide to explore something different, something that's been whispered about in the pubs and over slurred conversations on church steps. Not every place that serves gin is a collapsing alleyway filled with broken souls and empty bottles. There's a new kind of drinking den rising up amid the ruin, the Gin Palace. And tonight, you're going to see what all the fuss is about. You make your way to the western edge of the city, where the cobblestones get smoother, the lamplight glows a little brighter, and the buildings begin to look less like they're about to fall down. There's still plenty of gin, mind you, but here it's dressed up in silk and sparkle. The desperation is better hidden, tucked behind velvet curtains and clever design. And then you see it. The palace. It glows. Actually glows, thanks to gaslight, which has recently been introduced and is still novel enough to draw a crowd. The windows shine golden. The facade is trimmed in polished wood and brass, reflecting candlelight from the street like something out of a dream. Above the door, gilded lettering curls into a flourish. The juniper rose. Beneath it the words, "Refined spirits for refined souls." Cute. You step inside and feel the warmth first. Then the smell. Sweet. Herbal. With a faint note of lemon peel and something metallic. Gin, of course. But not the back alley paint stripper variety. This smells crafted, purified, marketed. The room is lavish, at least by Georgian standards. There are mirrors on every wall, making the space feel infinite, and polished wood counters that gleam under chandeliers. Velvet benches line the perimeter, and women in wide skirts and powdered faces lounge alongside men in neatly pressed coats. sipping from delicate glasses like they've never known a hangover. The lighting makes everyone look better than they really are. You could swear even your boots look newer under these lamps. This is the Gin Palace experience. Part theatre, part tavern, part social club. Everything is curated to feel rich, even if it's just smoke and mirrors. Quite literally. They use mirrors to make the shelves of gin bottles look endless. It works. The illusion is part of the intoxication. A man in a brocade waistcoat sidles up beside you, orders something called the Devil's Lace, and winks like you're both in on some great joke. His breath smells like nutmeg and gin. Better than a sermon and twice as fast, he says before walking away. The bartender? No, not bartender. This man is a mixologist, or at least he thinks he is. Prepares drinks with all the flourish of a stage magician. He pours, flames, stirs, even mists one glass with rosewater from a silver atomizer. You stare, unsure whether to laugh or applaud. This is not the gin of the slums. This is the spectacle. A performance with juniper. And yet, despite the polish and pretension, the goal is the same as ever, to forget, to blur the edges of the day. Only here, you do it with style. The palace crowd is a mix. Upwardly mobile clerks with just enough income to pretend they're gentry. Middle-class couples looking for a night of luxury on a shopkeeper's salary. Off-duty actors, aspiring poets, bored apprentices. Some women are here with men, but a few are here alone, pretending not to notice who's watching them. Everyone drinks. No one drinks water. A little-known fringe fact: gin palaces were among the first businesses in London to perfect what would now be called branding. They didn't just sell drinks, they sold an identity. Glass etched with floral designs, bottles with embossed logos, and printed menus offering named cocktails. A world away from scooping gin out of a bucket with a ladle. You weren't just buying a beverage, you were buying class, taste, mystique. Even if it all fell apart on the cab ride home. But there's a strange unease under the luxury. You see it in the hands that tremble just slightly as they lift a glass. In the way some patrons laugh too loudly, lean too close, blink too slowly. These people might dress better, drink cleaner, but they're chasing the same high as everyone else, the same foggy escape. The only real difference is how they carry it. There's some debate among historians about the role of these palaces in society. Some say they represented a dangerous normalisation of heavy drinking, cloaking addiction in elegance. Others argue they were the birthplaces of modern nightlife, precursors to cocktail bars, lounges, and even pubs as we know them today. Still others see them as places of dangerous egalitarianism, where classes mingle too freely, threatening the delicate social fabric of Georgian life. You watch a middle-aged gentleman strike up a conversation with a woman clearly several rungs beneath him in the social ladder. She's clever, bold, holding her gin like it's armour. Their flirtation dances between flirtatious and transactional. The lines here are as blurry as the lighting. This isn't a pub brawl or a tavern chorus, it's something quieter, but no less complicated. In the corner a piano starts up, an off-tune waltz played with more enthusiasm than skill. A few couples rise, spinning in tight circles between tables, skirts brushing the floor, laughter spilling out like fizzy wine. You sit and sip something called juniper gold, which tastes suspiciously like a fancy way to sell gin and lemon with sugar. Still, it's not bad, and it doesn't feel like poison, which is a step up from what you've seen. But after an hour or so, the glow starts to wear off. The gaslights flicker slightly. The mirrors seem more like a trap than a trick. You start to notice the shadows under eyes, the red rims, the sway of someone who's had one too many despite the velvet. The illusion cracks. You've seen the slums. You've seen Gin Lane. You've seen the mothers feeding babies gin through a rag. You know what lies beneath all this polish. You step back out into the street. The night has deepened. The air is colder now, brisk against your face. The sounds of the palace fade behind you, replaced once again by the groan of carts, the cries of street vendors, and the occasional muffled shout from somewhere too far away to help. Gin palaces, for all their grandeur, are just a new wrapper on the same old problem. They may glitter, but they don't shine. And the hangover comes just the same. You walk on. You don't get far from the Gin Palace before the glow fades completely. One more turn down a side street, and you're back in the tangle, where brick walls drip with condensation, roofs slope like broken spines, and people huddle in doorways as though their lives depend on it. In many cases, they do. The air here is sharp with soot and something vaguely sweet and rotten. That's the smell of neglect. And gin. Always gin. Tonight feels heavier somehow. The streets aren't as loud as usual, but the silence is tense, like something's about to happen, or maybe it already has. You follow a flicker of torchlight toward the sound of voices rising, not quite a riot, not quite a prayer, something in between. You turn the corner and there they are, a group of men and women gathered around a soapbox, literally a wooden crate someone's dragged into the middle of the street. Atop it stands a tall, wild-eyed man in a clerical collar, sweating through his coat despite the cold. "Repent!" he bellows. "Repent and turn away from the devil's water." Ah, a gin preacher. He waves a hand toward the gathering crowd. "It is mother's ruin, children's poison, the downfall of the empire," people shout back. Some cheer, some jeer. One woman throws a fish head at him. Another throws her empty bottle. Welcome to the front line of the moral panic. By the mid-18th century, the gin craze is no longer just a tragic problem. It's a political one. Reformers, clergy and upper-class moralists are in full uproar. Pamphlets fly faster than coins in the street, drawings of babies drinking gin. Sermons titled "The Sin in the Spirit." Headlines shrieking about crime, filth and ruin. And while some of it is exaggerated, a lot of it isn't. You listen to the preacher continue, eyes ablaze. "Look around you. Are you safer than yesterday? Has this drink saved your soul or stolen it?" He's preaching fire and brimstone, but the people aren't on fire anymore. They're tired, numb. Some cheer out of habit, some mutter curses. Most just watch, eyes dull, bodies swaying in that gin-soaked rhythm you've come to recognise. It's not just public health reformers out here. It's bishops, politicians, and increasingly landowners with something to lose. They see the city falling into disorder and they panic. Not because people are suffering, but because the suffering might spill over the garden wall. The lower classes are unpredictable, unruly, and now perpetually drunk. And while Parliament once encouraged gin production, they are starting to realise they've unleashed a monster, so they crack down, sort of. You remember hearing about the first Gin Act, passed back in 1729. It tried to slap a tax on gin, make licences more expensive. People ignored it completely. Then came the Gin Act of 1736, and it was laughably aggressive. Distillers needed a licence costing £50, a small fortune at the time. The punishment for unlicensed sale, harsh fines or imprisonment. But the result? Chaos. Riots. Vendors disguised as grocers or tea merchants. Children selling gin from empty milk bottles. Dogs trained to carry bottles through alleys. London got creative. You pass a shop with the sign "To Caterwall's tonic for all ailments." Inside, wall-to-wall gin. The bottle even says it right on the label, for medicinal use only. With a wink, of course. And here's a fringe fact for you. Some vendors took to calling gin Lady's Delight or Sanguine Drops to skirt the law. A lot of these names made it sound like perfume, or even health supplements. A little deceptive rebranding. Very modern, really. The preacher's still shouting as you move on, his words mixing with the clink of bottles and the scuff of boots on stone. You walk past a group of magistrates in powdered wigs, arguing in the doorway of a court, waving parchment and pointing down the street like someone's going to come fix things tonight. They won't, because here's the problem. Every time Parliament tries to restrict gin, demand just goes underground. The prices rise, the quality drops, the desperation doesn't move an inch, and so the next crackdown comes, then another, each law more convoluted than the last. And in the meantime, people keep dying, or worse, living but half alive, children raised on diluted spirits, mothers asleep in corners, men who no longer remember what they used to be before they began drinking themselves invisible. There's a real scholarly debate over whether these moral crusades helped or hurt. Did they reduce the chaos? Or did they just criminalise the poor even more, giving rich men an excuse to fine or imprison anyone caught staggering in the wrong neighbourhood? Some argue the laws were necessary to protect the public. Others say they were thinly veiled class warfare. The truth, as always, probably lives in the mess between. You duck into a narrow alley where three men are arguing over a tin flask. One tries to grab it. The other punches him in the throat. The third laughs and takes a drink. They're not angry, not really, just used up. Their movements are slow, dulled, like everything in this city now. You stop at a boarded-up shop, its windows smashed, its sign reading "The Honest Measure." Below that, a painted line now almost faded to illegibility. One sip, no more. The irony is too heavy to laugh at. You can feel it now, the tension building across the city. It's not just about gin, it's about who gets to suffer in Florence and who gets to be seen. The rich are demanding order. The poor are demanding relief. The middle class is caught between pretending it's not happening and drinking just enough to forget it is. And above it all, the reformers keep preaching. The priests shout about sin. The doctors hand out tonics laced with gin. The lawmakers argue over whether the poor are dying too quickly or not quickly enough. You glance back toward the square. The preacher has stepped down. A new voice has risen, harsher, less practiced. A woman this time, standing on the crate. Her shawl's slipping from her shoulders and her voice cracks on every second word, but she's shouting now too. "Where's our salvation?" she cries. "Where's the bread, the jobs, the help you promised?" Someone throws another bottle. It misses, but the words hang there, sharp and unanswered. The next morning breaks with the kind of damp greyness that feels less like weather and more like punishment. It's not raining exactly, it's just that everything's already wet. Cobblestones glisten with sludge, rooftops drip steadily, and your coat, no matter how chilly or how dry it was when you left your lodging, is now heavy with moisture and regret. London doesn't care, keeps going. You watch a rag cart creak past, piled high with fabric and bodies that may or may not still be alive, and you're reminded once again this city's survival is as stubborn as it is tragic. Today you're following a scent, not a good one, sour and sharp with an edge that makes your eyes water. The trail leads you to a makeshift gin shop. This one is barely more than a hole knocked into the wall of a fishmonger's storage shed. The merchant is long gone, replaced by a woman with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could carry through fog. She scoops gin from a wooden cask with a tin ladle and pours it into clay pots, recycled medicine bottles, and even one hollowed-out turnip. No cup, no problem. This is the kind of establishment the Gin Act of 1736 was supposed to eliminate. But that law, you recall, crashed harder than a blind man on a staircase. Back when it passed, it sounded impressive. High taxes, pricey licenses, threats of fines. But Londoners are nothing if not resourceful. Distillers went underground, they disguised themselves. They made up names and fake medical labels. They bribed constables or paid fines like rent. The act didn't stop the flow of gin. If anything, it made it more exciting, like a game. But then came the Gin Act of 1751, and now the real crackdown begins. You hear about it from a constable standing at a crossroads, puffing on a pipe like he's trying to outsmoke the city itself. He tells you the law changed everything again. This time, Parliament finally figured out what might actually work. Cut supply and demand, force distillers to be licensed by the magistrates, make gin shops harder to operate, use the courts to close them down and prosecute unlicensed sellers more aggressively. They didn't get it perfect, but it hit harder than the earlier attempts. By the mid-1750s, gin sales begin to drop a little, public drunkenness eases, slightly. Still, the damage had already sunk deep. The law might have patched a leak, but the whole city was still drowning. You turn a corner and find yourself in the middle of a protest. There was not a mob exactly, but a crowd, angry, loud. There are signs scrawled on bits of wood and cloth, slogans like, "We starve while they preach," and "Bread not sermons." One man is shouting about taxation without compassion, another has a baby in one arm and a bottle in the other. The baby's crying, the man isn't. This is the unintended side effect of the 1751 crackdown. Rage. People have lost access to the one thing that made their lives even remotely tolerable. They didn't stop drinking because they were persuaded to. They stopped because they couldn't afford not to, and that in turn left them more raw than ever. You duck into a shop to escape the crowd. Inside, a woman sells watered-down ale and approved tonics, which is to say gin with new branding. She serves it in small cups and claims it'll cure anything from gout to grief. It won't, but that's never stopped anyone before. This brings up a strange, almost laughable truth. The 1751 Gin Act didn't eliminate gin. It just reshaped how it moved through society. Upper-class distillers consolidated power. Respectable pubs started serving rectified spirits. Doctors, apothecaries and wellness men got rich selling gin disguised as medicine. The poor, as always, adapted or suffered. And often both. You pass a pamphlet vendor shouting, "Truths the Crown won't tell ye." He's waving a leaflet that blames the gin laws for increased hunger, child deaths and crime. He might be right. He might also be drunk. You buy a copy anyway. The woodcut on the cover shows a fat nobleman sipping wine, while a starving woman watches through the bars of a workhouse. Subtle, A few streets over, you find a newly licensed gin shop with windows intact and an actual printed menu. The woman behind the counter offers you a choice of 4 different botanical expressions. One is mint, one is black pepper and orange peel. You ask her if the law changed things for the better. She shrugs. Better for me, but worse for most. That about sums it up. Here's a quirky fact. One loophole during the crackdown involved something called the medical exemption. If you were an apothecary or claimed to be one, you could legally sell gin as a curative, so suddenly every gin shop had a backroom labelled consultation. People lined up for prescriptions that were really just cheap shots of gin with a spoonful of honey or a dab of molasses. Parliament knew, of course, but as long as things looked cleaner on the outside, the inside was allowed to rot quietly. You leave the shop and continue on, watching as a group of children chase a barrel down a hill. It wobbles, then crashes into a fruit stand. Everyone laughs. The stall owner curses, but doesn't chase them. Maybe it's the first time the streets felt alive today. Not far from there, you spot a small crowd around a man with a monkey. He's playing a concertina while the monkey dances and claps. People toss coins. The monkey takes a swig from a flask. Everyone cheers. You shake your head and move on. Historians still argue about how effective the 1751 Gin Act really was. Some say it marked the beginning of the end. Others argue that gin never really went away. It just adapted. The palaces grew glossier. The slums grew quieter. But the taste, the thirst, the need for gin didn't vanish. It just went deeper underground. As night falls again, the torches are lit, and you find yourself walking a city that feels slightly sobered. Not healed, not hopeful, just quieter. The howling chaos has dulled into a low murmur. The people still drink, but with more caution now, or more secrecy. You pass a small group praying in the corner of a churchyard, hands clasped, eyes closed. A few feet away, a woman sips from a cracked mug behind a gravestone. The lines between virtue and vice blur more each day. And somewhere, someone lights another lamp, pours another measure, and wonders how long this new quiet will last. You wake to the sound of screaming, not the sharp, panicked kind, but a slow, drawn-out wail that rises and falls like it's got nowhere else to go. It bleeds through the city like samuk, winding around chimneys, past alleys, through broken windows. You follow it instinctively, boots crunching over glass and ash, until you reach a familiar corner, Gin Lane again, or rather, what passes for it now, just another slumped stretch of tenements sagging with damp, and people who look like they've forgotten how to hope. You find her on the steps of a crumbling stoop surrounded by a small cluster of neighbours doing their best to look busy while not staring. The woman is barefoot, her dress torn, her face streaked with grime and snot. Her hands tremble as they rest on her lap, and next to her, barely visible beneath a ragged blanket, is the source of her grief. A small, motionless bundle. She isn't speaking in full sentences, just fragments. Didn't mean to. Only a drop. He wouldn't sleep. He was crying all night. You don't need the rest. You've seen enough. This is what they mean when they say mother's ruin. It's not just a nickname. It's prophecy. A slow unravelling that targets women in particular and mothers above all. In a city where every second child dies before their 5th birthday, where a loaf of bread costs more than a day's labour, and where warmth is a memory, gin becomes both comfort and curse. A soothing drink that's so easy to overdose on, especially when you're trying to quiet a child who hasn't stopped wailing since yesterday. The other women on the street start murmuring their own stories. One lost a daughter to a fall down the stairs. Another found her infant face down in a tub of gin someone mistook for bath water. Some of the stories sound exaggerated, like urban myths whispered to keep people in line, but many are heartbreakingly real. In the years of the worst craze, deaths like this aren't rare. The newspapers call them tragedies, the pamphlets call them sins, the courts, they mostly call them inconvenient. For the poor, mercy is expensive and few can afford it. You make your way through the neighbouring streets and see more signs of the damage. A girl, no older than 13, staggering barefoot with a baby on her hip and a half-empty bottle in her hand. A boy asleep on a doorstep, face pale and limbs twitching from whatever was in the last batch of gin he drank. A woman begging for coins with one hand and holding a spoon to her lips with the other, eyes already drifting out of focus. This isn't sensationalism. This is the undercurrent of daily life for many Georgian women. For those with no dowry, no trade, no husband, the options are brutally narrow: domestic service, prostitution, or starvation. Gin predictably slips into that list like an old friend. It warms when the fires are out. It quiets children when there's no food. It dulls the reality of being used, ignored, or left behind. The scholarly debates around this are knotty. Some historians argue that the narrative of gin destroying motherhood was exaggerated by reformers to shame working-class women, while others insist that it was an accurate, if painful, reflection of a crisis no one else wanted to face. The truth likely lies in the middle. Gin didn't create despair, but it poured itself straight into the cracks. You pass a midwife sitting on a stoop, smoking a pipe with one eye half closed. She tells you bluntly she's seen more stillbirths in the last decade than she can count. Some of them had nothing to do with gin, but plenty did. Babies born trembling, limbs twisted, eyes clouded. She says the worst part is that the mothers didn't even cry anymore. They just went quiet, she says, like someone pulled the life out of their voices too. You duck into a tenement where a friend of hers works. She's a healer of sorts, more apothecary than midwife, though her treatments are mostly herbs, boiled roots, and yes, gin. She offers you a dram for your nerves, then shows you a cabinet filled with bottles, lavender gin for sleep, aniseed gin for digestion, juniper and bitter orange for female trouble. Every bottle doubles as both medicine and indulgence. One of the more chilling realities of the time is that women were often encouraged to drink for their health. Doctors prescribed gin as a remedy for hysteria, irregularity, melancholy. Many upper-class women drank daily, convinced it was good for their complexion, and for working-class women, it was the only affordable doctor they had. You leave the tenement and pass a group of children singing in the street, one of those clapping songs passed down like inherited trauma. The lyrics are nonsense, the rhythm infectious, but one line catches your ear. Baby drank the gin, Mama said it's fine, Baby went to sleep and stayed for all our time. They sing it like a joke, like it's just a rhyme, but you feel your stomach turn anyway. Here's a strange fringe detail. There was once a popular belief that gin made childbirth easier, not less painful, just faster. Some women drank heavily during labour, hoping it would numb the pain or hasten delivery. In a world without pain relief or medical support, gin became an almost ritualistic part of pregnancy for some. The results were, unsurprisingly, disastrous. Later in the day, you sit by a well where a few women are scrubbing clothes. One of them says she's 7 months along. Another says she buried her 5th child last winter. The third just nods and says, "Mine won't make it. He coughs all night. Can't breathe." You ask what they do when the children cry. "Gin on the gums," one replies. "That or a cloth over the mouth?" She says it so casually you have to stop and stare. She meets your eyes and says, "Don't look at me like that. You try feeding 3 mouths with nothing in your pocket. Try sleeping when they scream all night and you haven't eaten in 2 days." And you realise then, this isn't about cruelty. It's about exhaustion, so deep it drains out even the instinct to be gentle. As night descends again, you hear the woman from the morning, her voice still raw but now quieter. She's sitting beside the child's body, unmoving. Someone's draped a cloth over the little bundle, and someone else has brought her a bottle. She doesn't drink from it, not yet. You wonder if tomorrow she'll remember what happened, if she'll wake and scream again, or if she'll just go quiet like all the others. You turn away, and the city drinks on. You walk longer than usual tonight, maybe because you need to clear your head, or maybe because you're starting to understand that no matter where you go in this city, gin follows. It seeps through the mortar, leaks through the cracks in the floorboards, and whispers through keyholes. You've seen it cradle crying mothers and lull babies into silence. You've seen it gilded in palaces and ladled out in buckets. But now you're heading into a part of London where the drink is less comfort, more fuel, where gin stops numbing pain and starts sharpening violence. The neighbourhood has changed again. Gone are the lounging drunkards and glassy-eyed lullabies. Here the buildings lean closer together, darker, grimier, like they're conspiring. You see boys posted at corners, watching the street like sentries. Faces too young and too old all at once. One nods at you, not in greeting, but in warning. You've entered the domain where gin and crime shake hands, where poverty has festered so long that it's mutated. You smell it in the air, a different stench than before. Not just rotten smoke, but blood. Not fresh, not alarming, just lingering, dried and in. This is where gin becomes both the motive and the method. You duck into an alley lit only by the flickering torchlight from a nearby blacksmith's forge. The walls are streaked with soot and something darker. You nearly trip over a man lying across the path, face bruised, nose clearly broken. He's breathing, sort of. A woman stands nearby, holding a broken bottle like a dagger, and she doesn't look particularly remorseful. She mutters something under her breath about stolen gin and an unpaid debt. You step around her. She doesn't stop you. She's not afraid of anyone. Crime in gin-soaked London isn't an organised, stylish affair like in the novels or stage plays. It's not clever men in masks. It's not dashing rogues or charming thieves. It's chaos. Dirty, bloody, unpredictable chaos. Fights start over eye contact. Muggings happen in broad daylight. Murders get blamed on shadows and forgotten before the body cools. You follow a trail of noise to a low-slung tavern with no name and no door. Just a curtain of rags nailed to the frame. Inside, it's all elbows, teeth, and shouting. The air is warm, wet, and thick with smoke from pipes and the fire. Gin flows freely from ceramic jugs passed hand to hand like communion. The crowd here doesn't drink to forget. They drink to fight. And they do, often, and without much provocation. In the far corner, two men are locked in a fistfight that's moved past drama into something more desperate. One of them is clearly losing. Blood spatters across the floor and the others cheer, not with joy, but with the kind of boredom that suggests this happens every night. A woman takes the opportunity to slip her hand into the loser's coat and lift a coin purse. She's quick, she's done it before. You slip back outside, ears ringing. Gin isn't creating violence here. It's just lowering the floor. It removes the last layer of inhibition, that thin skin of restraint between anger and action. When life already feels like war, gin is just a weapon that doesn't need sharpening, a fringe historical fact. One London surgeon claimed that in the 1740s, cases of facial lacerations, especially from broken glass, increased threefold. Glassings, they might be called now. Back then, they were just the natural result of a city full of cheap gin, no police force, and very little hope. You break a bottle, you swing it, and no one asks questions afterward. The law can't keep up, and half the watchmen are drunk too. You pass a group of night watchmen now, lanterns in hand, pacing like tired dogs. Their job is to keep the peace, but they're outnumbered, underpaid, and occasionally bribed with a dram or two to look the other way. One of them is asleep standing up, forehead resting gently against a lamppost. Another is talking to a young woman with a black eye and a sarcastic smile. He nods, says something, hands her a coin, and keeps walking. You're not sure who just bribed who. Historians still argue whether gin truly drove crime rates up or just made the crimes more visible. London was growing fast, packed tight, and barely regulated. The slums were already ripe for lawlessness. But with gin, the thefts got bolder, the assaults more frequent, the bodies harder to identify. Gin didn't invent desperation, it just stripped away the part of your brain that whispers, maybe not tonight. A few blocks over, you find yourself in a courtyard that looks abandoned at first. Then you hear the rustle. Someone is rummaging through the body of a man slumped against the wall. You approach carefully. The looter, a boy, maybe 12, freezes. Then he bolts. No shame, just necessity. The man he was robbing is alive, barely. His face is swollen, his lips cracked, and his breath comes in rasps. There's a bottle still in his hand, fingers curled so tightly around the neck you'd have to break them to pry it free. You kneel, say something useless, and then just sit for a moment. He doesn't respond. He's not even drunk anymore, just hollow. There's a fire burning in a nearby barrel, and a few figures huddle around it. Young, old, hard to tell in the flickering light. One sings a verse of a drinking song that ends in a slurred curse. Another jokes about a man who tried to rob a gin shop and got beaten with his own walking stick. The laughter is thin, but real. This is where camaraderie lives now, in broken teeth and shared bruises. You hear the story later, at a more respectable tavern, about the Gin Alley butcher, a man who supposedly drank himself into a rage and killed 4 people with a cleaver before setting his own shop on fire. True? Who knows? But it's the kind of tale that spreads in a city like this, a fable with just enough truth to stick. Another scholar's debate, one that still echoes today, is whether the gin craze's link to crime was moral panic or genuine correlation. Was it a convenient excuse for a broken system? Or did the gin really tilt people over the edge? The numbers are fuzzy, the record's flawed. But walking these streets, seeing what you've seen, it's hard to believe the drink wasn't at least pushing. You make your way back out of the worst of it. watching as the sky begins to lighten ever so slightly. You pass a church where someone's carved "Gin is Sin" into the wooden door. Below it, in smaller, fainter letters, "But it's all we've got." And somewhere behind you another bottle breaks. Another fist lands. Another name gets forgotten. It's not even fully dark yet when the city shifts again. There's a lull, brief like a held breath, and then the sounds start rolling back in. Shouts, boots on cobbles, a distant scream, and the familiar clink of glass against stone. You find yourself drawn to one of the few people left in this city who still walks the streets by choice, not out of desperation or drunken aimlessness, but duty. A man in a tattered uniform with a battered lantern in one hand and a staff in the other. He's the night watchman, and tonight you decide to walk with him. He doesn't ask why. Maybe he's used to company, or maybe he's just too tired to care. His lantern throws a warm, flickering glow, casting long shadows behind everything. It feels theatrical at first, like you're part of a stage play. But the illusion breaks quickly when he kicks a rat the size of a rabbit out of his path and mutters, "Third one tonight." His name is Josiah, and he's been walking the city's bones for almost 15 years. Long enough to know every creaking door, every window that rattles in the wind, and which alleys are too dangerous to patrol alone. He tells you that before Gin took over, his nights were mostly quiet. The odd thief, a bar brawl, maybe a wayward drunk trying to find his way home. Now, it's like walking through purgatory. Tonight's route takes you from the edge of Seven Dials through St Giles and into Clerkenwell, the heart of the storm. Every corner, every courtyard, every shadowed stoop tells a story, some recent, some half erased. You pass a woman singing lullabies to a doll dressed in baby clothes. She cradles it gently, then takes a long pull from a jug at her feet. Josiah doesn't stop. "She lost the real one 2 winters ago," he says. "Just carried on like this ever since." A few blocks later you find a man curled in a doorway, face blue, lips cracked. Josiah checks for a pulse, sighs when he finds none, and marks a crude X in chalk on the door behind him. "Someone'll come cart him off in the morning," he says, assuming no one strips him first. You ask if he's ever scared. He snorts. "Only of getting used to it." He tells you stories as you walk. How last week, a man tried to set fire to his own gin shop after drinking half his stock. How 2 nights ago he found a woman asleep in the street with her infant pressed to her chest, and both of them stone cold. How he once had to fend off 3 boys with blades made from broken bottles. They weren't trying to mug him, just drunk and angry at the dark. The watchman's role has always been more symbolic than effective. London, even at the best of times, is too vast and too lawless for a few underpaid men with lanterns to control. But now, with gin thick in every artery of the city, the job has become something between caretaker and silent witness. He can't stop most of what he sees. He just notes it, responds, moves on. You round a corner and find a street you swear you've walked before. But now it looks different. There's a fire burning in a barrel, surrounded by figures hunched close. Someone's playing a fiddle, badly. Another person, maybe a girl, is dancing, her hair swinging wildly, feet slapping against the stones. A few others clap along. It would feel almost festive if it weren't so clearly a distraction. A break from despair. Josiah nods toward them. Every so often the city throws a party to remind you it's still human, even if just barely. There's a debate among scholars about the real duties of the Georgian-era night watchman. Was he a crime fighter? A social worker? A walking deterrent? The answer, like everything else in this story, is complicated. Records show that most were older men, former tradesmen who couldn't manage full labour anymore. They worked in shifts, shared lanterns and staffs, and often had no formal training. Many were nearly as poor as the people they patrolled, and many drank heavily. Josiah claims he stays sober. Not out of principle, he admits. Just don't trust myself with it anymore. You press him on that. He hesitates, then tells you about his brother. Fell into the gin early, worked as a coupiste, good with his hands, bad with grief, lost a child, then a job, then a wife. Gin filled the gaps, until it didn't. Josiah found him face down in a water trough one morning, bloated, blind, and still clutching an empty bottle like it owed him something. "I've seen what it does to strangers," he says. "Seeing it in someone I knew, that made it different." You fall into silence after that, the kind that only London can hold. The city groans around you. Somewhere nearby, someone is singing a hymn, slow and slurred. Another alley echoes with laughter, sharp, cruel. Somewhere else, glass shatters and someone yells. Josiah doesn't flinch. Eventually, you come to a small chapel with an iron gate and a flickering lamp above the door. Someone's left flowers on the steps, dried, wilted, but arranged carefully. Josiah stops there for a moment, just long enough to close his eyes. You ask if it's his church. No, he says, but I like to think someone still prays for us. He checks his pocket watch, nods, and says his shift's nearly over. Soon another man will take up the lantern. Another pair of boots will trace the same path, and the city will keep lurching forward, one desperate breath at a time. Before you leave him, he turns to you and says, "You keep looking for answers in this city, but all you'll find is more of the same. The real question is how many nights you can walk before you stop noticing what's missing." You nod, unsure how to respond. Then he disappears into the dark, lantern bobbing like a star swallowed by smoke, and you're alone again, with the silence, and the drinkers, and the soft, steady heartbeat of a city too drunk to remember how it started. There's a particular kind of quiet in the gardens of the wealthy, a curated, manicured silence broken only by the occasional bird call or the gentle trickle of a fountain. This morning you find yourself inside one of those carefully kept pockets of peace, far from the filth and frenzy of Gin Lane. The estate belongs to a baronet who made his fortune in textiles and has recently developed a passion for public health. He considers himself a reformer, which is why you're here, on the other side of the gin craze, with those who never had to stand in line for a bucket of cloudy spirits or trade their last farthing for a sip of numbness. You walk with him through trimmed hedges and gravel paths, past busts of Roman philosophers and a rose garden that smells too sweet to be real. He's old, upright, and completely unaware that his shoes are worth more than an entire family's income back in the slums. He talks about policy, about the moral erosion of the poor, and about the plague of the bottle. But he says all this with a tone of detachment, like gin is a misbehaving servant rather than the force swallowing half the city. Still, to his credit, he's not wrong about everything. The upper classes are starting to take notice, really notice what's happening in the streets. At first, they laughed it off. Bit of drunken chaos, street theatre for bored aristocrats. But now there's unrest, violence, the faint smell of revolution in the air. And that scares them. In drawing rooms and dining halls across the city, the elite are finally asking, okay, what do we do about the poor and their obsession with gin? As if it's a simple problem with a tidy solution. As if they weren't part of the equation. Inside the house, you pass through a salon filled with women in pale silk. Powdered faces bent over embroidery and idle gossip. One of them snorts with laughter as she reads aloud from a newspaper article about a woman who tried to baptize her baby in gin. The others titter. Someone jokes, perhaps the child will grow up holy and spirited. The joke lands, everyone giggles. No one thinks about the child. You pause by the fireplace where two men in powdered wigs sip sherry and complain that the latest gin legislation has upset their distillery investments. What they don't understand, one of them mutters, is that the trade supports hundreds of respectable families. It's not all drunkards and whores. It's always interesting, you think, how easily the narrative shifts when money is involved. Gin is a disease when it's in the hands of the poor, but when the wealthy profit, it's a business, a tradition, a legacy. You wander upstairs into the library, a room the size of a chapel filled with polished wood and the smell of old paper. There's a table stacked with reform pamphlets. Most of them brandish titles like The Devil's Liquor or The London Apocalypse. A few are more measured, calling for licensing reforms, health campaigns, education. You spot one called A Letter to Parliament, on the virtues of beer over spirits. Inside, an entire chapter is dedicated to the moral benefits of hops. It's a bit much, and yet there's truth in the panic. A very real fear that gin is unravelling the threads of society from the bottom up. What begins with women neglecting children turns into men neglecting jobs, families falling apart, and entire neighbourhoods becoming zones of lawlessness. The rich watch it like a spreading fire creeping toward their hedges. One fringe fact you stumble across in a dusty folio: several wealthy families in London had escape plans drafted in case the gin-fueled riots reached their homes. Not just ideas, actual detailed plans. Carriages hidden in back courtyards, country houses stocked with supplies, secret routes sketched on fine parchment. The threat was that real, or at least the paranoia was. But here's where the hypocrisy glows brightest. because while the upper crust wrings its hands about the poor's drunkenness, its own members are hardly teetotalers. In fact, a significant portion of the ruling class consumes gin regularly, only theirs comes dressed in civility, flavoured, clarified, served in crystal. It's not the drink that offends them, it's the people who drink it the wrong way. Take Lady Agnes, for example. You meet her briefly in a drawing room lit by morning sun. She's sipping a clear liquid from a teacup and laughing about her gin drops. She insists they help her nerves. They're herbal, she explains, with angelica and coriander, so it's really medicinal. You glance at the bottle. It's 80 proof. She blinks slowly, her speech a beat behind her thoughts. And yet, no one scolds her. No one labels her a danger to her children or her community. She is, after all, elegant, pale, expensively dressed. Her addiction is invisible, disguised by etiquette. There's a long-standing academic debate about whether the upper class genuinely wanted to fix the gin crisis, or just control it. Historians point to the uneven enforcement of the laws, watchmen who turned a blind eye to elegant homes with gin on the table, while raiding poor neighbourhoods with clubs and torches. The same gin, two different stories, one a treat, the other a threat. Before you leave, you glance at a letter pinned beside the estate's mail tray. It's from a magistrate complaining about the rise in street crime, urging citizens to maintain order and moral uprightness in these troubling times. You recognise his name from an earlier pamphlet. You saw it listed on the board of directors for a major gin distillery. You don't know whether to laugh or weep as you step back out into the gardens. The baronet offers you a cordial parting thought. Society must uplift the poor, he says, but only if they're willing to be uplifted. We can't force virtue. You nod, polite. But in your mind you think virtue doesn't come from silk cushions and distance. It comes from the hard places, where gin isn't a vice but a shield. And just like that, the estate gate closes behind you, and you're back on the muddy road that leads toward the river. The garden's silence fades. The city's noise returns, distant shouting, a bottle rolling into a gutter, a child crying. The sound of London, gin in its lungs, staggering forward. It's later now, the sun bleeding into the cobbles, and you're back in the part of town where the streets feel sticky with stories. But tonight's not about watching, it's about listening. Because if gin has saturated every brick of the city, then it's also soaked deep into its culture. And what better way to measure a city's decline, or its defiant humour, than through the songs, the satire and the ridiculous ballads its people sing as they stumble home. You're near Covent Garden, hovering at the edges of a crowd gathered around a street performer balancing on a beer barrel. He's missing a few teeth, which doesn't stop him from grinning like a man who's cracked the code to immortality. He's got a fiddle player behind him, and together they launch into a raucous tune titled Old Jenny's Elixir. The lyrics go something like this. Take a sip of Jenny's brew, she'll cure your gout and morals too. If you wake up in the Thames, blame the bottle, not your friends. The crowd roars. Coins hit the cobbles. Someone howls with laughter. Someone else hiccups into a puddle. This is how gin becomes folklore, not just as a drink, but as a character. A trickster god. A devil in a bonnet. She's everywhere. In poems, in puppet shows, on painted signs, and in the nicknames people use to make horror sound funny. It's not Mother's Ruin here. It's Auntie Juniper. It's White Satin. It's Mad Mary's Morning Milk. The satire is relentless. Broadsheets sell for a penny each, printed with crudely drawn cartoons of gin drinkers growing tails, breathing fire, or transforming into beasts. One popular image shows a woman nursing her baby with one hand and pouring gin into her own mouth with the other, while rats dance on the table. Beneath it, the caption, The Modern Madonna. You overhear two boys arguing over which is funnier, the one where the clergyman drowns in his own gin baptismal font, or the one where the judge passes out mid-sentence and sentences himself to be hanged. The satire is vicious, but also, in its own twisted way, protective. People are laughing not because it's funny, but because it's true, and laughing is easier than crying. You stop by a print shop near Fleet Street, where the windows are filled with the latest ballad sheets. One of them is titled The Drunkard's Dream, and it tells the tale of a man who dies in an alley and ascends to heaven, only to be cast out because he tried to distill gin from angel tears. Another sheet simply reads, A Catalogue of Spirits, and their unholy effects. Each spirit is given a personality. Old Tom makes you lie, bathtub. Bill turns you into a thief, Widow's Kiss makes you forget your name. You buy a copy just to hold it. The paper is coarse, the ink still smudging at the edges. You wonder how many people are learning to read by sounding out these verses. Rhymes about debauchery are apparently easier to memorise than sermons. There's a debate among scholars about the role of humour during times of crisis, whether it's a survival mechanism or a distraction. Some argue that the gin ballads and satirical prints trivialised suffering, made it easier for society to ignore real pain. Others say the opposite, that satire was a weapon, a subtle protest, a way to bite back at the powerful without losing your tongue. You wander into a smoky tavern where a makeshift stage has been erected from old shipping crates. A man in a powdered wig, clearly fake, and sagging to one side, launches into a mock sermon titled The Holy Juniper. He preaches to the audience like a fire and brimstone bishop, waving a gin bottle and quoting invented scriptures, and lo, the Spirit did descend upon them, and they were filled with laughter, forgetfulness, and the occasional stabbing. The audience eats it up. In the back, a woman sings a slower tune, more haunting than funny. My man went to the gin shop, said he'd be home by 4, but the clock struck 8. The bread went stale, and I barred the blessed door. Her voice is rough, not from age, but from hard nights and harder mornings. Still, everyone goes quiet to listen, because buried in the satire beneath the comedy is the truth that no joke can quite erase. This is still misery. It just rhymes better when sung. One fringe detail you'd miss unless someone told you: many of the public entertainers in this era weren't just clowns or buskers. Some were former preachers, disgraced magistrates, even bankrupt nobles. London, for all its divisions, has a strange way of folding everyone into the same pile once you fall far enough. And when you do, there's always a stage, a rhyme, a bottle, and an audience ready to laugh at your pain, as long as you sing it well enough. Outside again you pass a young boy selling satirical pamphlets from a rickety cart. One cover shows a gin bottle being crowned like a king, the title, His Majesty King Juniper I. You ask the boy if he reads the stories himself. No, he says, don't need to, they're all the same. Someone drinks, someone dies, and someone else takes their boots. You can't argue it with that. Farther down the lane, someone's chalked a poem on a wall. Gin into the morning, gin before bed, gin for the living, gin for the dead. If truth be a poison, then lie me a cup, and I'll toast to the city that never wakes up. You pause to read it twice. It sticks. As the night stretches on, the sounds of music, laughter, and glass breaking begin to blend into one steady hum. Not cheerful exactly, but relentless. You realise now that gin has become its own genre, of art, of music, of identity. People don't just drink it, they sing it, mock it, worship it, fear it. It's the city's favourite villain, and also its most dependable friend. And as you make your way back through the winding streets, with songs still echoing in your head and verses tucked in your pocket, you start to understand what no reformer ever could. Sometimes, when a city is bleeding, it doesn't cry. It sings. You're getting better at spotting them now, the fakes, not the people, but the gin. It's become a sort of survival skill, like recognising a bad mushroom in the woods, or hearing the warning hiss before a snake strikes. You can smell it before it even reaches your lips. That sharp off-tang. Too sour, too bitter, or somehow too clean. When gin is too clear, too crisp, you start to worry, because that means someone's gone through extra effort to disguise whatever hellish cocktail they've cooked up in a basement barrel with nothing but guesswork and desperation. Tonight you follow a trail that starts with a rumour. Someone's selling gin that's putting people in the ground by morning. That's not unusual, sadly. What is unusual is how fast it's happening. One drink, maybe 2, and people collapse, not blackout drunk, not incoherent, just gone. You heard it from a fishwife who said her cousin's husband died on the spot, bottle still warm in his hand. You heard it again from a butcher's apprentice who said he saw a woman seize up after a sip and fall like a stone. So now you're here, in the damp underside of a Spitalfields, crouched in the dark as a crowd of customers gathers around a cart with a sheet pulled tight over it. The vendor is a slick-looking man in a coat too clean for this part of town, and boots too shiny for someone not expecting to run. He calls it Heaven's Ink. That's how he sells it. You'll see stars after one sip, he says with a grin that doesn't reach his eyes. The crowd laughs, they always do. That's the trick. If you make the death sound poetic, people line up faster. You watch a young man buy a bottle, he can't be older than 17, all elbows and hunger, and take a swig right there in the street. For a second nothing happens, then he lets out a strange little gasp and sits down hard on the curb, eyes wide. His friend slaps his back and laughs. You don't. The vendor glances your way, and for a moment, you both know the same truth. This isn't gin. Not just gin. Not the stuff born from grain and sweat and juniper. This is something else. Something faked, doctored, dangerous. Here's a fringe fact for you. During the height of the gin craze, hundreds of chemists across London began experimenting with additives to stretch their supply. They'd water down their gin, sure, but they'd also lace it with things to boost its flavour or perceived strength. Turpentine for that piney kick. Sulphuric acid to give it that furry finish. Oil of vitriol, alum, spirits of wine. Sometimes even lead or mercury ground into a powder so fine it shimmered in the bottle. No wonder people went blind or mad or both. There was no regulation, no inspection. The laws, if you could even call them that, only cared about who had a license, not what went into the bottle. You could sell literal poison as long as you had the right stamp. And if you didn't, well, just don't get caught. You trail the vendor for a while as he ducks through side alleys and courtyards, never staying in one place for more than a few minutes. It's a pop-up death shop. No signage, no loyalty, just coin and oblivion passed hand to hand. Later you hear about another variant, something called Flaming Spirit. Not a brand, not really, but a nickname. A distiller out in Wapping figured out how to add enough ethanol to the batch that it could actually ignite. People lit it on purpose, drank it like a dare. The stories say it burned all the way down. One man claimed it cured his arthritis. Another coughed blood for a week and swore it was worth it. There's a debate among modern historians over whether the prevalence of tainted gin was exaggerated by reformers, especially artists like Hogarth who wanted to dramatise the crisis. Some argue that not every cup of gin was laced with poison, and that most deaths were due to overconsumption, not toxicity. Others insist the adulteration was widespread and lethal, with homemade stills producing inconsistent and often hazardous batches. No one really knows. The records are full of bias, hearsay and bodies. You take a detour into a courtyard behind a butcher's shop where an old woman is selling gin from teacups painted with blue flowers. She's polite, even cheerful, calling her a concoction the widow's comfort. You ask what's in it. She shrugs. Bit of this, bit of that, mostly gin, some pepper, lemon peel and, well, best not to ask, love. The customers don't ask. They drink. A few twitch. One starts laughing and doesn't stop. No one seems concerned. Not even the drinkers. There's an eerie kind of fatalism to it now, like they've made peace with the idea that the drink might kill them. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, they're warm, numb, and briefly less afraid. You find yourself thinking about the phrase bathtub gin. That comes later, of course. Prohibition-era slang from across the ocean. But the idea's already here. The gin isn't clean, it isn't safe. It's whatever someone could boil down in a stolen pot with a few herbs and a prayer. The difference between a good batch and a deadly one? Luck. Even licensed sellers are getting sloppy now. You stop by a more respectable-looking shop near Cheapside and listen as the vendor boasts about a special reserve. He says it's been aged for 6 weeks, which is laughable. Real gin, during this era, isn't aged at all. It's rushed through the still bottle hot and sold cold. The aging is a lie. A flourish for the wealthier clientele who want their poison to sound prestigious. Before you leave, you speak to a physician who's been keeping track of what he calls gin injuries. He shows you his records: blindness, seizures, skin rashes, organ failure. He suspects many of these are caused not by alcohol alone, but by the toxins added during production. He's tried writing to Parliament, no response. He says people don't care about poisoned gin until it affects someone important. A dead beggar's a tragedy, he mutters. A dead nobleman, that's a scandal. As the night deepens, you pass a shuttered gin shop with a single candle flickering in the window. On the door, someone scrawled in chalk. Clean spirits only, no flame, no filth, no lies. You'd like to believe it, but in this city, even the truth has a price. So you keep walking, past the bubbling stills, past the powdered additives, past the half-blind drinkers and the wide-eyed vendors, and you realise finally the truth of it. In a world where gin is currency, anything that burns can be bottled and sold. It's strange how the landscape shifts when you're looking for comparisons. After days spent in alleys, basements, and behind false storefronts with names like the Pissing Devil or Mad Mary's Medicinals, you decide to duck into something more familiar, or at least more established. A pub, an honest-to-God old-world tavern. Oak beams, fire in the hearth, mugs of ale thumped onto scarred tables, the smell of wet wool, sour beer, pipe smoke. This is where drinking used to live, before gin crashed the party. The sign out front reads, "The cockerel and crown faded and chipped, but still standing. It's been here for nearly a century." You step inside and immediately feel the difference. The room is louder, yes, but not in the chaotic, unravelling way of a gin den. The noise is structured. Laughter at one table, arguing over a game of cards at another. Someone in the corner halfway through a story involving a lost boot and a magistrate's daughter. It's a mess, but it's a comfortable mess. There's a rhythm, this is a beer house, and it knows its identity. A world away from the gin shops that sprang up like boils across London in the last few decades. Here, ale and porter, still rule, served in proper mugs, pulled from casks by a woman with strong arms and stronger opinions, no fancy herbs, no mystery liquids that might blind you. Just barley, hops, yeast and thyme. You find a seat and listen to the regulars. They're older, gruffer, and not particularly fond of the gin craze. One man, missing 2 fingers and a good deal of his hearing, tells you he hasn't touched gin since 39. It's not drinking, he says. It's vanishing. He gestures toward the door. Them that drink it. They don't come back. Not really. You hear another call gin a woman's drink, which feels less like an insult to women, more like a reflection of the panic around changing norms. Pubs traditionally were male spaces. Ale was a shared experience. Slow, social, woven into daily life. But gin? Gin could be drunk quickly, in private, and by anyone. Especially women. And for a lot of old pub-goers, that shift was threatening. Not just to their habits, but to their very sense of place. A quirky fringe fact for you. Before the gin craze, alewives, women who brewed and sold beer, were common and respected. They wore aprons, ran small public houses and brewed in their own kitchens, but as gin spread and the gin shop replaced the home-brewed ale, many alewives turned to spirits. Faster money, less spoilage, and far more demand. But in the process, beer lost its homey domestic anchor. It became something you went out for, and that changed everything. There's a debate still playing out among historians, whether the rise of gin meant the decline of pub culture, or whether the two just learned to coexist like cats in a small room, constantly sizing each other up but unwilling to start the fight. What's clear is that pubs had to adapt. Some began selling gin just to keep up. Others tried to lean into their identity. Clean floors, good ale, maybe even food. You'd call it branding now. Back then it was survival. You overhear one older woman telling the barkeep she won't serve gin anymore. Not since that boy died in the back room. She says it quietly, with the kind of finality that sounds like a closed door. The barkeep, a barrel of a man with a missing eyebrow, just nods and pours another round of ale. Gin's cheap, he says, but so's poison. Even here, though, safe, solid, rooted, you see the cracks. A few younger men at the back are clearly drinking more than ale. One pulls a small flask from his coat and adds something clear to his cup. The others smirk. The barkeep sees it. Doesn't stop it. Maybe he's tired, or maybe he's learned it's better not to pick every battle. You step outside for air and notice the street has its own rhythm. One side lined with pubs, traditional wood-panelled, proud. The other dotted with new gin shops, glowing signs, painted windows, even a place calling itself a Spirit Emporium. The contrast couldn't be sharper if someone had drawn a chalk line down the centre of the road. It's not just about drink anymore, it's about identity. Ale is history. Gin, say, is modernity. Ale is slow. Gin is instant. Ale belongs to the past. Gin is kicking the door in. And yet it's not quite that simple, because the boundaries blur. Some pubs serve gin, some gin shops pretend to be pubs, and some customers swing between the two depending on their coin, their mood or their pain. You wander into another establishment, smaller and dimmer. The landlord here is honest about it. He serves both. Has to. Don't like it, he says, but I've got 3 kids and 2 cellars. If I don't sell gin, the chap down the street will. He pours you a pint and tells you how he used to brew his own beer, back before the taxes climbed and the customers dropped off. Now I water it down and pray no one notices. You sip. You notice. He tells you about fights, how the gin drinkers are always quicker to anger, less predictable. How he used to deal with rowdy lads, but now it's women clawing at each other over spilled drinks and sailors knocking over tables for reasons even they can't explain. Beer makes you argue. Gin makes you destroy. Back outside, you walk past a man who's urinated against a pub wall and now lies half in the gutter, muttering something about needing his mother's blessing. A woman tries to rouse him, fails, checks his pockets, moves on. Even the pubs are changing. You end the night back at the first tavern, where someone started playing a fiddle and half the room is singing along to a song about a drunk who married his own cousin by accident. It's rude, it's loud, it's strangely comforting, and for a moment it almost feels like the old world is still here. But only for a moment. Then someone starts coughing hard enough to choke, and you hear a crash as a glass bottle shatters, and the laughter tips toward hysteria. And you remember, this isn't really about pubs versus gin shops. This is about a city slowly losing its balance, and no amount of beer-soaked tradition is going to steady it. Not while the bottle's still full. You wake to smoke, acrid and low-hanging, the kind that sticks to your skin and tastes like soot with a hint of panic. There's shouting from the next street over, feet pounding, metal clanging. You pull yourself upright and follow the noise, instinctively ducking as a wooden shutter crashes to the ground inches from your head. Around the corner you see it, a crowd thick with motion, more growl than speech, swarming outside a gin shop with a painted sign that reads, "Good cheer for less." Except this morning, no one's in a cheerful mood. This is a riot, and it's been building for days, maybe weeks. The pressure's been swelling with each new restriction, each increase in price and each empty bottle followed by an empty pocket. Now something has cracked. It started when the shop raised its prices overnight, said the gin was getting harder to source, said the new tax left no other choice. But the people, they don't care, not about taxes or supply. All they know is that what was once a penny now costs 2, and that someone they can see, is to blame. The crowd surges forward, hurling bricks, bottles, fists. Someone kicks the door in. Someone else climbs through the window and throws out the stock by the handful, bottles of clear liquid, some corked, some not, crashing and soaking into the mud. The smell of juniper and burning wood mixes in the air like some twisted perfume. You edge back, keeping to the shadows. The faces in the crowd are contorted, not just with anger, but betrayal. Gin was supposed to be theirs. The one thing they could count on, and now it's slipping away behind laws, taxes, and rising costs. This isn't an isolated incident. These gin riots, as they'll later be called, have been popping up across the city in small bursts of fury. And it's not just the slums anymore. Clerkenwell, Wapping, St Giles, even parts of Southwark. Anywhere people feel the vice tightening and no other escape in sight. Here's the irony. The government once encouraged gin, wanted to undercut French brandy, wanted to use up surplus grain, wanted to give the poor something to keep them quiet. But now that same drink is sparking protests, looting and nights of glass and fire. The beast they fattened has learned to bite. You remember reading that the Gin Act of 1736, the first real attempt at regulation, didn't cause reform. It caused revolt. Vendors disguised themselves as chemists. People rioted when sellers were arrested. There were stories of mobs storming courthouses and burning arrest warrants in the street. And now, in the wake of the stricter 1751 legislation, the unrest is even more personal. Because this time it's not about the morality of gin, it's about the access. You pass a house with its front door ripped off the hinges. Inside, a woman sits cross-legged in the middle of a bare floor, clutching an empty bottle to her chest like it's a child. There are boot prints on the walls. The furniture is gone. She doesn't move. Outside, the constables finally arrive, too few and too late. They carry clubs, not lanterns, and they're not asking questions. They move in hard and fast, swinging indiscriminately. A boy no older than 12 goes down with a cry. A man with a broken nose gets dragged face first through the dirt. It doesn't stop the crowd, not yet. The riot takes on a rhythm, smash, shout, scatter, regroup, repeat. You duck behind a barrel as someone hurls a lit torch into the gin shop's storage room. It catches instantly, flames racing up the wall with terrifying speed. The smell is choking, burned spirits, scorched wood, melted glass. Someone cheers, another retches, a third slips in the mud and is nearly trampled. This isn't just drunkenness, it's fury. It's addiction with its back against the wall. You spot a familiar face, a street preacher you've seen before, usually shouting about the sins of gin. Now he's in the middle of the riot, trying to shout down the mob. "This is the devil's work," he cries, waving a Bible. A stone glances off his shoulder. He stumbles but keeps shouting. You wonder if he realises how little the devil has to do with it now. There's an old debate among scholars about these riots, whether they were truly political or simply the chaos of a desperate populace pushed too far. Some argue the riots were acts of rebellion, early tremors of class consciousness. Others dismiss them as the flailing of addicts deprived of their fix. But watching this now, with the fire spreading and people screaming, you see something more complicated. It's not just about gin. It's about what gin represented, a rare moment of choice in lives full of orders. Take it away and you're not just removing the drink, you're stripping away the last illusion of control. Down the alley, a woman throws a chair through a second-story window. A man climbs onto a wagon, declares himself King of Gin Street, and is promptly pulled down by someone who wants the crown for himself. Nearby, a shopkeeper tries to douse the flames creeping toward his doorstep, but the water only spreads the alcohol. The fire leaps higher. The watch arrives next, tired, confused, and completely outnumbered. They try to block the crowd, but the tide is already turning. People scatter, retreating into doorways and alleys. The worst of the damage is done. The shop is burning. The shelves are bare. The fury has spent itself for now. You walk through the aftermath. Charred wood crackles underfoot. A single shoe lies in the street, somehow perfectly upright. The air is thick with smoke and silence. You pass a boy sitting on the curb, knees pulled to his chest. He's bleeding from the forehead, but still cradling a bottle half full of cloudy liquid. You ask if he's all right. He shrugs. "Could have been worse," he says. "Could have been sober." There's laughter down the road, the exhausted kind that sounds more like crying. A group of women pass a bottle between them, hands shaking. One of them says, "They'll come for the rest of them next. Every shop, every drop." No one argues. You stop near the still-burning ruins of Good Cheer for Less and watch as the flames flicker against the fog. Someone sings a soft tune, barely audible. We lit the fire to warm our bones, but burned the house instead. And you realise something. This isn't the end of the gin craze, it's a warning shot. The drink may dull the pain, but when it's taken away, all that agony returns in full force and brings friends and fire. After the fires die out and the smoke clears, London doesn't return to normal. Not really. The ash is swept up, the windows boarded, the bodies, those unfortunate enough to be caught between a riot and a constable's boot, are quietly removed, unmentioned in polite company. But the damage lingers, not just in the cracked foundations or the scorched shop fronts. It settles deeper, into conversations, into eyes that don't quite meet anymore. The city has seen something ugly, something it already suspected about itself but tried not to say aloud. And now the physicians come. You meet one at a coffee house near Bloomsbury, his coat tidy, his wig neat, his boots freshly polished. He introduces himself as Dr. Jeremiah Sims, physician to both the poor and the perturbed. He's here to talk about what gin actually does to the human body. Not the moral decay, not the economic ruin, the science, the meat of the matter. He pulls out a notebook, stained at the corners with what you hope is ink, and starts reading off symptoms he's recorded in the past decade. Trembling hands, rotting gums, night terrors, auditory hallucinations, fevers with no infection, bloody stools, spontaneous nosebleeds, blindness. He pauses. And of course, he says dryly, death. According to Dr. Sims, and others of us in his circle, what they're witnessing is something new, or at least newly visible. A full-scale, drink-induced disintegration of the mind and body. They call it various things: gin fever, spirit madness, or simply the collapse. Not all gin does it, not all drinkers succumb, but for those who fall hard, it's fast and merciless. And here's the twist: they don't fully understand why. Sims describes patients who exhibit signs of psychosis after weeks of drinking cheap gin. He describes women who begin to twitch uncontrollably, then weep without reason for hours, then lapse into violent silence. He tells you of a man who tried to cut off his own ears because he couldn't bear the ringing. Gin, he says, unhooks the mind. In some people it simply dissolves. You ask if it's the alcohol itself. No, he says, or not only, is what they put with it, the turpentine, the acid, the whatever it is. I once treated a man whose gin was laced with mercury. He went blind, then forgot how to breathe. It sounds theatrical, but Sims insists he's not alone in this thinking. More and more doctors are beginning to suspect that the gin craze isn't just a moral crisis, It's a neurological one. Fringe fact, a few London physicians began experimenting on cadavers of known gin drinkers. Some even wrote papers, now mostly lost or buried in dusty archives, claiming that prolonged gin consumption visibly altered the texture of the brain. Softer, spongier. One even described it as like fruit left too long to rot. Nobody believed him, or perhaps nobody wanted to. You ask Sims if the medical community has reached any consensus. He laughs. No, God no. Half of them still think gin is a useful tonic. The rest are too frightened to say otherwise. You see, medicine doesn't just follow science, it follows power. And gin is powerful. You walk together through Soho, past taverns that now hang signs promising pure spirits only and approved by apothecary license. A new wave of marketing has begun. In the wake of the riots, shop owners are desperate to clean up their image. Gin is being rebranded as a health drink again, as if slapping a Latin label on the bottle makes it less likely to kill you. Sim stops to speak with a gin seller, wearing a white apron and spectacles, looking more like a pharmacist than a barkeep. He talks in gentle tones about quality control and filtered juniper, and balancing the heat of the spirit with cooling herbs. Sims listens, nods, then turns to you once the man is out of earshot. None of that means anything, he says. It's all just drink. And when you drink enough, it doesn't matter how clean it was going in. Still, there's something fascinating about how quickly the city tries to medicalise its problems when morality fails. If the law can't stop people from drinking, perhaps a diagnosis can. Sims tells you about a hospital, Bethlem, or Bedlam as it's more commonly called, that's beginning to see an influx of patients described simply as gin mad. Some scream day and night, others stare at walls for weeks, one recites psalms backward, until his voice goes hoarse. You ask if they ever recover. Some, he says, but they're not the same. It's like part of them was erased. Another theory floating through medical circles. Gin affects the nerves. This is long before modern neurology, of course, but the early thinkers were already noticing a pattern, shaking hands, facial tics, which gave them sudden outbursts. They called it nervous distemper. One doctor claimed he could diagnose it by touch. He said the skin of a gin drinker felt like paper left in damp, which is both strange and oddly poetic. There's a heated debate going on now among physicians, reformers, and magistrates about whether gin drinkers should be treated as criminals or patients. Should they be jailed or sent to infirmaries? Should they be punished for poisoning themselves or protected from the poisoners? You visit one such infirmary, a brick building that smells like boiled cabbage and urine. Inside, rows of cots, each occupied by someone in various stages of withdrawal. One man thrashes violently, tied at the wrists and ankles. Another mutters to a shadow in the corner. A woman stares at the ceiling with pupils wide as saucers, whispering, "Where's the baby?" over and over. None of them are being treated exactly. Just watched, housed, tolerated. There are no cures, no plans, just containment. You walk past a nurse who shrugs and says, "Give them time. They'll either sweat it out or die." Sims is furious. He mutters under his breath about funding ignorance, blindfolded doctors. But even he doesn't know what to do. We're treating a city that doesn't want to be healed, he says. It wants to be quiet. That's not the same. Outside you hear singing again. Raucous, stumbling, joyful. A group of sailors passing a bottle, arm in arm, completely unaware of the things you've seen in the last hour. Or perhaps fully aware, and simply past the point of caring. You ask Sims one last question. What he thinks will happen in the end. He pauses. If we're lucky, he says. They'll run out of gin. If we're not, they'll just start calling it something else. And as you leave him behind, walking once again into the glowing mouth of the city, you realise that whether gin attacks the liver or the mind, the damage spreads just the same. Some poisons come in bottles, others walk on two legs and carry clipboards, and London, either way, keeps drinking. You're starting to recognise the drunk before they even speak. It's in the way they move, slow, like they're underwater but still trying to dance. The way their eyes focus not on you, but slightly to the left of your shoulder. As if your outline makes more sense than your soul. You've seen the standard cases, the slurred speech, the swaying, the wide grins that turn sour without warning. But tonight, you're looking for something a little rarer. You want to meet the legends, the famous drunks, The cautionary tales, the ones who have become almost mythical in their wreckage. And wouldn't you know it, London delivers. You start in Covent Garden, where you hear about Mad Jack Tipple, a poet who once recited an entire ode to gin while hanging upside down from a butcher's sign. He's supposedly still alive, though most people assume he drowned in his own verse years ago. You find him sitting under a cart surrounded by crumpled ballads and sticky bottles, wearing a hat made out of newspaper and quoting Virgil like it's a drinking song. He insists gin has expanded his mind. You're not so sure. His eyes are yellow and his fingers twitch constantly, but when he speaks, it's with the rhythm of a man who used to matter. Gin, he says, is the only muse who pays in hallucinations. You leave him with a nod and a halfpenny and move on. Next is the Duchess of Dust, an ageing courtesan who once performed for lords and now performs for anyone who will offer her a shot. She used to wear velvet. Now it's soot and scraps. She sets up in the entrance of a burned-out gin shop and sings dirty limericks to the passers-by. Her voice is hoarse but commanding. When you ask how she ended up here, she laughs and says, "I went looking for comfort and found company instead. They never warned me the two aren't the same." And then there's Bartholomew Bones Ellery, a former surgeon known for operating drunk, and better drunk than sober, or so he claimed. Bones was once respected. Now he's more myth than man. They say he treated gout with sawdust and set bones by instinct. He drinks gin straight from a pewter teapot and mutters about phantoms he carved out of living flesh. You see him only briefly, peering out from an alley like a mole sensing the sun, and when you blink, he's gone. These people aren't footnotes. They're warnings wrapped in folklore. London collects them like relics, proof that gin doesn't just rot your body, it rewrites your story. Makes you memorable for all the wrong reasons. You think about the way people talk about them. Not with pity exactly, but with a sort of grim respect. As if these are the ones who went furthest, drank deepest, and somehow still woke up. You stop by a pub in Southwark where someone tells you about Eleanor Thrush, a pamphlet writer who once composed fiery sermons against the evils of gin until she got caught drinking it under her desk. Now she lives in a garret above a bakery, paid in bread and stale cider, writing gibberish manifestos and dipping her quill in gin instead of ink. You climb the stairs and hear her before you see her, shouting through the floorboards at invisible lawmakers. When you finally meet her, she's in a stained nightgown, eyes red, nose purple from burst blood vessels. "I still believe in reform," she croaks, "but I no longer believe in mornings." There's something tragic about how many of these figures were once respected. Artists, clergy, surgeons, scholars, they didn't begin as cautionary tales. They were simply tired, or grieving, or brilliant in a way the world didn't know what to do with. And gin, being the patient predator it is, offered them silence, and applause, and then ruin. You pass by a crowd laughing at a man who's reenacting an entire courtroom drama with himself as judge, jury, and defendant. His powdered wig is made from horsehair stuffed into a sock. His gavel is a gin bottle. He slams it against a crate and declares himself innocent. The crowd cheers. Then he takes a bow, throws up and curls into the gutter. One fringe fact from the archives. During the worst of the Gin Craze, some local papers began publishing serialised confessions of notable drunkards. They were dramatised, of course, ghost-written or entirely fabricated, but people read them like cautionary fables. The ruin of Jonathan P. From pulpit to pavement, a vicar's final toast. It was pulp horror for a population living in the aftermath of real-life tragedy. The line between biography and fiction blurred until no one cared which was which. There's scholarly debate about whether these infamous drinkers should be seen as victims or performers. Were they symptoms of a broken system? Or opportunists playing the role of the fallen for a few pence and a sympathetic glance? Some say the line doesn't matter. If you fall far enough, the act becomes the reality. You sit on a bench in Soho, watching the crowd swirl around a man known only as Captain Gintry, who wears a rusted military coat and tells anyone who'll listen that he once fought Napoleon. He didn't. He spins yarns about naval battles that end with him toasting the Queen and downing an entire bottle of something that smells like turpentine. No one interrupts him, everyone cheers. He's a living attraction, and maybe, in a way, happier than he was when he wore the coat for real. You wonder if he knows it's all theatre now. Back on Fleet Street you pass a chalkboard with a message scribbled in slanted hand. Raise a glass for the genius, the ghost, and the gone. They drank the songs we were too afraid to sing. You think about Mad Jack and Eleanor Thrush and the Duchess of Dust. About how gin didn't just wreck them, It made them visible, gave them something to hold on to, even if it burned. And you realise, with a jolt of discomfort, that some part of you envies them, not their ruin, but their refusal to hide it. It's late now, the city is quieter, the performers have scattered, the alley stages have gone dark, but somewhere out there, someone's still sipping from the bottle that turned them into a legend, and someone else is watching, wondering how long it'll take before they join the act. By now you've noticed how often gin is framed as a personal failing. The pamphlets scream about vice, the sermons blame sin, the caricatures draw it with warts and devil horns. The idea, mostly unspoken but deeply embedded, is that the drinkers, the real drinkers, the ones curled in gutters or screaming at invisible judges, chose this, that they were weak, immoral, pitiful. But as you drift east toward the river, and the air thickens with salt and soot, a different truth begins to crystallise. Gin isn't just a drink, it's a symptom, a signal flare, a mirror held up to a city that has failed its people and then blamed them for breaking. And nowhere does that truth burn brighter than in the workhouses. You find one near Whitechapel, tucked behind a row of shops that sell bread too stale to eat and cloth too coarse to wear. It's a squat square building, built more like a prison than a refuge. Grey walls, barred windows, a gate that clangs shut behind you like a verdict. The porter eyes you with suspicion, but lets you in when you mention you're here to observe. That word still carries power. For now. Inside, the atmosphere is bleak but orderly. Rows of narrow beds, a bitter stench of boiled potatoes and damp wool. Men and women separated into different halls, children kept apart, quiet, watching everything. You can't help but notice the silence, unnatural, stifled, like sound is something that must be earned. A woman mopping the floor tells you this particular workhouse holds nearly 200. All poor, all desperate, many with histories of gin addiction. She points toward a corner where a man sits staring at his empty hands like they've betrayed him. That one drank until he couldn't remember his own name, she says. They found him in the cemetery, not in a grave, just lying on one. The workhouse isn't meant to heal, it's meant to contain, to separate those deemed a danger to themselves and others. The philosophy is simple. If you can't feed yourself, clothe yourself, or stop shaking long enough to sit upright, then you're no better than livestock, and you'll be treated accordingly. You're taken to a small locked room, a kind of infirmary, though it resembles more of a cell. Inside, a woman lies in bed, her face pale and hollowed by something deeper than time. She twitches as she sleeps. Her wrists are bound loosely, not out of cruelty but precaution. She was a nurse, someone tells you. Saw too much death, started drinking to forget, forgot everything. You ask if they'll release her. No family, no trade, nowhere to go, so she stays. There's a cruel debate among politicians right now, whether workhouses are too generous, whether providing food and shelter without labour encourages laziness. Some reformers argue that charity without cost leads directly to gin addiction. Others say the workhouse should be less humane, harsher, to frighten people into sobriety. You can't help but wonder what kind of mind designs punishment for the desperate and expects it to cure them. Fringe fact? Some workhouses briefly experimented with gin replacement therapies, herbal tonics and bitter brews meant to mimic the ritual of drinking without the intoxication. Most recipients rejected them outright. It's not the taste they're after, one overseer said. It's the silence, whatever that means. You speak to a thin man in his 40s who insists he was a carpenter once. He can't remember where he worked, or for how long, only that his hands used to be stronger. He tells you gin wasn't his vice, it was his solution. The only thing that kept my hands from shaking, he says, holding them up. Now look, no gin, no work, no life. Tell me what else I was supposed to do. He's not angry, just tired. Outside, the sun breaks briefly through the clouds, casting light across the yard where a few residents gather for air. One of them, an elderly woman with wild white hair, sings quietly to herself as she turns in circles. The song is familiar, something from the street ballads you've heard, but slower, sadder. The others ignore her. You can't tell if they're used to it or just pretending she doesn't exist. The workhouse master, an overworked man with grey on his collar, tells you that half the new arrivals in the past year had gin listed somewhere in their story. Not always as the villain, sometimes just the backdrop, but always there. We're not here to judge, he says, just to keep them alive long enough to forget they were ever human. He doesn't mean it cruelly. He says it like someone describing the weather. You ask how many leave the workhouse. Few, he admits. Fewer still who don't return. One academic you read, Dr. Pemberley, or maybe Pembleton, once called the workhouse the corpse of compassion. A place that looks like mercy from a distance, but is made entirely of control, shame, and stints. And here, inside its walls, you understand exactly what he meant. Because this isn't a hospital, it's a filter. A holding cell for the unwanted, the gin-soaked, the forgotten, the inconvenient. And what's more tragic, most of them don't even resist. They're grateful for the meal, for the cot, for the chance to be still. They've accepted the trade, freedom for a roof, dignity for routine, pain wrapped in structure. You leave the workhouse through the same iron gate, the clang louder this time. Final. The street outside is muddy, the air thick. A child sells matches by the corner. A man with one leg curses at pigeons. You pass a former gin shop now converted into a temperance room, offering hot tea and cold stares. No one goes inside. And as you walk away, it hits you all at once. This city didn't just let gin happen. It needed it. Needed something to mop up the pain, to blur the cruelty. To make poverty look like choice. And now, when the bottle's empty and the hands start shaking, London blinks and says, "How did this happen?" As if it wasn't watching the whole time. There's something eerie about walking past a gin shop that's been boarded up, not out of bankruptcy or fire damage, but by official order. A stamped notice nailed crookedly to the door declares it closed in accordance with the Act of Parliament for the better prevention of spirituous liquors. The paper is weather-worn, barely legible, but it still stands, still warns. The shop itself is silent, the windows dark. It feels like the city is holding its breath, trying to forget that a year ago, this place would have been bursting with shouting, singing, and broken glass. You keep walking, down side alleys and half-lit corridors, through courtyards where the smell of stale alcohol still clings to the walls. You're not looking for a drink tonight. You're looking for the ones who aren't drinking anymore, not because they don't want to, but because they can't. They don't have a word for it yet, not officially, not in the pamphlets or parliamentary debates or polite conversation over dinner, but you're seeing it, all over the city, the raw, miserable shape of addiction, not a flaw, not a failing, a pattern, a condition, a need so deeply wired it howls when denied. The medical world hasn't caught up. Doctors still talk in vague terms, overindulgence, chronic intemperance, spirituous dependence. They'll call it melancholia, hysteria, even moral corrosion. But never addiction. That would imply something deeper than bad choices, something less voluntary. And no one wants that, not yet. You spend the morning at a charity clinic in Shoreditch, a shabby little building squeezed between a pie shop and a pawnbroker. Inside, a man in a frayed coat and ink-stained sleeves is trying to count the number of habitual drinkers he's seen in the last week. He gives up around 40. "The same faces," he says, "same stories. I stopped. I won't do it again." Then 2 days later they're back, sweating, shaking, eyes like pinholes. He says some try laudanum to cope. Others switch to beer. A few swear off everything, then sneak back at night, begging for a sip of anything, gin, vinegar, turpentine if it burns right. It's not preference, it's compulsion. Even the ones who want to stop, he says, don't know how, do you ask what he gives them? Warm broth, a place to sit. That's about all I've got. He's not a doctor, just a man who got tired of stepping over bodies. Fringe fact, 1 or 2 early thinkers do suspect that alcohol could be chemically addictive, that it might physically rewire the brain. There's a journal entry from 1749 where a German physician describes a trembling in the limbs when abstaining from spirits, noting that the condition appears not unlike palsy, but of a most restless and urgent nature. No one listens to him, or they laugh. Either way, the idea doesn't stick. Back outside, you see the invisible line drawn in society, not just between drinkers and non-drinkers, but between those who are allowed to recover and those who aren't. A gentleman who collapses from gin is taken home, put to bed and offered advice. A labourer who does the same is thrown in the gutter and told to find work. You visit a home for fallen women, a converted parsonage run by a group of steely-eyed matrons who believe in salvation through saints and hard bread. Many of the women here were arrested drunk. Others were found sleeping rough or worse, Most are thin, wary, and covered in the kind of bruises that don't come from accidents. One of them, a girl barely 17, tells you she hasn't had gin in over a month. She says this like someone confessing a sin, not with pride, with shame. "I miss it," she whispers. "Not the taste, just the nothingness." You stay quiet. There's not much to say to that. One of the matrons lectures about temptation and discipline. She calls gin the mother of ruin and the father of regret. But as she talks, you watch the girls, how they drift, how their eyes wander. They are not listening. They've heard it all before, and they know that when they leave here, the streets will still be waiting. And so will the bottle. There's a growing undercurrent in reform circles that something about gin isn't fixable with sermons and shame. A few brave thinkers, often mocked, always ignored, have started to use a new word: habit. They talk about breaking the habit, managing the habit, resisting the habit. It's still moralised, of course, but it's the first step toward recognising that some people don't want to drink, but have to. You stop in at a temperance meeting disguised as a tea social. No alcohol allowed. Not even wine. The attendees speak in hushed tones. One man stands and says he hasn't touched gin in 5 weeks. Another admits he slipped the day before. They don't cheer or condemn. They nod. There's a quiet kind of strength in it, a tiny revolution, one sip at a time. And yet, outside in the alley behind the building, a man is throwing up behind a stack of crates. He staggers to his feet, wipes his mouth with his sleeve and pulls a flask from his coat. You ask if he knows what's going on inside. He laughs. "Of course I do. I was in there last week. Didn't take." You watch as he stares at the flask for a long moment, then pockets it without drinking. "Maybe tomorrow," he mutters, and walks away. You think about that moment all night, because addiction, before it has a name, is just a series of almosts. Almost stopped. Almost better. Almost free. You pass a church with its doors flung wide open. The sign says "Sermon on Sobriety." Inside, a dozen people sit scattered in the pews. The preacher is shouting about the devil in the drink, but the audience isn't trembling in fear. They're trembling from withdrawal, and no one seems to notice. As the night falls, you walk past the places where gin still flows, quietly now, behind curtains, under counters, in teacups and medicine bottles. The city is trying to pretend it solved something. It hasn't. It's just rebranded it. The drinkers are still here, only now they're invisible. No longer scandalous, just inconvenient. And the truth hangs in the fog like breath on a cold night. You can't legislate addiction away. You can only name it and hope someone listens, even if it takes another 100 years. It's easy to think of the gin craze as a thing of the past. A fever that broke somewhere between burned-out shops and tear-stained sermons. And on the surface, London looks like it's healing. The riots have quieted. The workhouses have absorbed the wreckage. The temperance societies are multiplying like pious rabbits. And most importantly, for Parliament at least, the laws are working. Fewer gin shops, higher prices, stricter licensing, more enforcement. The streets are, technically, cleaner. But scratch the surface and the truth squirms underneath. Gin didn't die. It just changed costume. You spend your morning in Marylebone, once a quiet district, now a testing ground for what reformers are calling the respectable drink. There's a new kind of gin being sold here. Not from muddy carts or back-alley teacups, but from crystal decanters in polished shops with brass fixtures and windows so clean you can see your regret reflected twice. They don't call it Mother's Ruin anymore. Now it's London Dry. You step into one of these places, where the shopkeeper greets you with the confidence of a man who's never once had to mop vomit off his threshold. He's dressed like a banker, his gin bottles arranged like fine perfume. He speaks in tones that drip with gentility, promising botanical infusions, subtle spice, and a refined drinking experience. You ask him who buys this stuff. Ladies, mostly, he says, and younger gentlemen, the sort who like their vices tucked into waistcoats. So this is the new gin. Sanitized, elegant, and absolutely unrecognisable from the stuff that used to knock a tooth loose. It's clear, crisp, filtered through reputation. You can almost hear the city sighing with relief. "We've fixed it," it says. "Look how nice everything smells now." And to a certain extent the numbers do back it up. Gin consumption has dropped from its volcanic peak. The unlicensed shops are fewer. The deaths, at least the messy public ones, have tapered off. The government has even issued a few triumphant statements about the triumph of order over chaos, as if the gin craze was a natural disaster, and Parliament the heroic levee builders. But you know better. Because when you follow the trail down the alleys, past the cleaned-up boulevards and into the corners the city doesn't like to name, you find the old gin. Still steaming, still sharp, still fatal. It's here in the bottle, tucked beneath the floorboards of a tailor's shop near Fleet Street. The owner swears he's sober now, but he keeps the bottle anyway. For visitors, he says, which is code for bad days. It's in the flask of a lamplighter who swigs between poles to keep the chill out of his bones. Doctor's orders, he jokes, though his doctor's been dead 10 years. And it's in the eyes of a woman in Smithfield who offers you a drink from a paper-wrapped jug she calls the Old Cure. When you ask what it cures, she says, hope. The thing about addiction is, it doesn't vanish. It adapts. And London, clever beast that it is, adapts with it. The same city that once painted gin drinkers as moral filth now markets gin as a delicate pleasure. The same parliament that condemned the spirit plague now invests in distilleries. And the same society that mocked the poor for drowning their sorrows now toasts their successes with top-shelf versions of the very thing they banned. Fringe fact for you, one of the largest gin companies in England, founded not long after the Gin Act of 1751, was launched by a man who publicly supported gin reform. His secret? He believed there was no need to abolish gin, only to elevate it. And with clever marketing, better packaging and government cooperation, he helped create a new kind of spirit. Gin for the middle class. A drink you could be proud to sip, not just survive on. The academic debates shift accordingly. The question is no longer should people drink gin, but who gets to drink it acceptably? Is it only for those who can afford a glass that doesn't cut their lips? Or is the shame permanently attached? No matter how fancy the garnish. You visit a theatre where gin is served in the lobby in tiny gilded cups. It's fashionable now, trendy, the kind of thing young ladies joke about while clutching their pearls. I had 2 gins last night, one says, as if she's talking about stolen kisses. You wonder if she's ever heard of Gin Lane. You wonder if she cares. You spot a painting in an art dealer's window, an oil reproduction of Hogarth's Gin Lane, ironically priced far out of reach of anyone who might recognise its truth. It's become decor, a historical curio, the horrors now aestheticised for polite parlours. You step closer, study the image again, the starving child, the skeletal drinker, the chaos frozen in brushstrokes, and in the reflection on the glass, you catch sight of a bar across the street. Selling craft gin cocktails for 6 shillings a glass. It hits you then, the full absurdity of it. The gin craze didn't end, it got a job, put on a wig, learned to smile. The city wants you to believe it won. That vice was defeated by law, by faith, by order. But you've seen the truth, the vice just changed fonts. It's written now in elegant script on menus. It's infused with rosemary and sold with citrus. It's poured in silence and swallowed with pride. And the people still suffering, the ones too poor to sip their sorrows in safe spaces, are still drinking, still shaking, still dying. Only now, no one's painting pictures of them. You stop by a memorial service for a reformer, Sir Edmund Blackby, a man who fought tirelessly to ban unlicensed spirits. At his funeral they serve champagne and restorative gin tonics to the guests. You raise a glass with the others because it would be impolite not to, and as you drink you wonder how many in this crowd would recognise the scent of real gin, the old stuff, the kind you survive. Outside the rain begins to fall in delicate threads. You walk past shuttered shops and glowing windows, the city wrapped in fog, polished now, respectable, but beneath it all the same heartbeat pulses, low and steady. Drink, forget, repeat. The gin craze may be over on paper, but in spirit, London never stopped drinking. It just stopped apologising. The city is quieter now, not because it has sobered up, but because it has learned how to drink in silence. The cries are no longer public, the fall no longer theatrical. People still drink, of course, but they do it with better glassware, with garnish, with distance. The chaos of Gin Lane has been replaced with the curated blur of dinner parties and private clubs, where the spirit flows just as freely, but no one is allowed to call it desperation. You find yourself walking into one of these new private clubs, more mahogany than humanity, all cigars and whispers and patterned wallpaper that looks like someone tried to trap luxury in a repeating loop. It's the kind of place where the gin is imported, the ice is sculpted, and the air smells faintly of lavender and old money. You don't belong here, and you know it, but for now you're a guest, and you're here to meet a man named Sebastian Elwyn, A distiller turned social climber turned accidental philosopher of spirits. Sebastian greets you like an old friend he's already forgotten. He's tall, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of smile that makes you check your wallet afterward. He offers you a drink before you can answer. You say yes, because that's the only correct answer here. Do you know, he says as he pours a neat measure of gin into cut crystal, that the juniper berry was once thought to ward off the plague? You nod. You've heard that one before. He leans in. We've always believed spirits could save us. From sickness, from sadness, from ourselves. The room is warm, the gin floral. You listen as Sebastian waxes poetic about the ritual, how drinking, in this new London, has become less about the liquid and more about the performance. In the Georgian era, he says, people drank because they had no other choice. Today we drink because we can. You don't correct him. He wouldn't want you to. Instead, you ask if he's aware that the poor are still drinking the way they did back then. Desperately, quietly, dangerously. Of course, or he says, as if you've asked him whether clouds exist. But we've outgrown the need to worry about them, haven't we? There it is. The soft satin cruelty of the age, wrapped in good manners, served with ice, the scholars of today, and tomorrow will have their debates. Some will argue the gin craze was a moral lesson, a cautionary tale that taught the British people about the dangers of unregulated vice. Others will say it was an economic explosion, a reflection of class disparity wrapped in the story of a single drink. A few, the brave ones, will suggest it was a mirror, showing a society teetering between industrial ambition and spiritual collapse, reaching for something to make the days shorter and the nights kinder. There's even a theory you hear in one of those newer lecture halls, an academic suggesting that gin was the birth of modern anaesthesia, not in the medical sense, but the cultural. The first time people embraced chemical detachment on a mass scale. Long before Freud, long before Big Pharma, London was already numbing itself with a bitter little drink that tasted like fire and forgetting. Fringe fact, there's a collection of preserved gin bottles kept in the basement of the Royal College of Physicians, some still sealed, some so cloudy with time that they look like bottled ghosts. They are part of a quiet archive, not open to the public, not displayed with pride, just kept, as if the past might still be useful, if only as a warning. You walk back through the streets as night settles in again. There are fewer signs of obvious collapse now. The women no longer breastfeed in alleyways with bottles in their free hands. The men no longer howl in front of distilleries. The fires have gone out, but the need, that gnawing ache for escape, still there. Only now it has rules, permits, menu pairings. You stop by a bookshop near Holborn where a window display catches your eye. It's a newly printed memoir, My Years in Gin Lane, written by the descendant of a former magistrate. The summary on the dust jacket promises scandal, redemption, and a personal exploration of London's love affair with ruin. You flip it open. The first chapter begins with a sentence you've heard echoed in a dozen mouths, all across time. I didn't mean to become a drunk, but I just needed to stop feeling like myself. You buy the book. You don't know why. Outside the rain starts again, gentle this time. The city glistens, shining like it's trying to look clean, like it's forgiven itself. You stop at a modern gin bar, the kind that looks like a cathedral, a subtle vice. Inside, the walls are lined with shelves of glinting bottles, each one promising handcrafted purity and artisanal bliss. You order one, just one, for research. The bartender is wearing a pressed shirt and a blank expression. He asks if you want it with cucumber or lime. You say lime. He hands it to you with a practiced grace. You take a sip, and you feel it. That warm thread pulling through your ribs. That faint fog at the edge of clarity. That letting go. And in that moment you understand everyone who ever leaned too far into the bottle. The harlot, the preacher, the nurse, the Duchess of Dust. Not because they were weak, but because this city has always been too much. Too loud, too cruel, too fast, and gin makes it just bearable. You stand, pay, leave. You walk past a man asleep on a bench, his coat soaked through. He's clutching something. A bottle? A rag? You can't tell. You don't wake him. You don't pity him, because now you know better. He's not lost. He's just still living in a version of London most people pretend doesn't exist. And when they say the gin craze ended in 1751 or 1760, or whatever year makes them feel most proud, you'll think of him. And smile, because gin never really left. it just went underground. You return to Gin Lane one final time, not the literal street airborne, long since renamed and swept under layers of civic polish, but the idea of it. The myth, the ghost. It's still here, tucked into the creases of the city like a folded letter no one dares open anymore. You walk the path slowly, retracing the journey that began with cheap spirit and ended with cultural combustion. And the truth is, Gin Lane never really had an address. It was always more state of mind than place. What you're walking through now is a version of London that wants to forget its own blood-soaked story. The buildings have been rebuilt, the signs repainted, the reformers congratulated and then forgotten themselves. But under the cobblestones, under the paving and the plaque erecting and the naming of streets after people who did the least damage, the bones are still there. They rattle if you listen closely. You pass a church that once served as a gin den during the height of the craze. Now it hosts brunches and organ recitals. The stained glass windows have been repaired, the floor scrubbed clean. And yet a whisper clings to the walls, of bottles passed under pews, a sermon slurred of women baptizing their children in gin because it was cleaner than the water. You visit the ruins of a distillery burned down during the riots, now a parking lot. Someone has scrawled "The spirits never left" in chalk on the retaining wall. You stop and stare. There's no one around. No one to claim the message, and that somehow makes it more honest. You remember them all now, every soul you've crossed on this long blurred journey. Mad Jack Tipple still shouting sonnets at clouds. The Duchess of Dust turning ash into laughter. The surgeon who operated while blitzed. The preacher whose voice cracked before the bottle did. You remember their faces, their words, their sweat-soaked regrets. They were all real, and they were all allowed to vanish, because that's how London survived this, by forgetting, by letting the wounds scab over until the city can pretend they were never there. There's a new gin shop in Westminster with a velvet rope out front, and a bouncer in a silk waistcoat. You watch as customers, smart coats, expensive shoes, line up to taste historical gins, modelled after 18th century recipes. The irony is so thick you could bottle it. Inside you catch a glimpse of the decor. Exposed brick, candles in old gin bottles, wood panels designed to look weathered, though you know from experience real rot doesn't come with price tags and matching coasters. You hear a server explain the Mother's Ruin flight, a trio of gins meant to take the drinker on a journey through the ages. The guests sip, they nod, they laugh. Someone says, "I feel like I'm in history." And for a second, you want to walk in and scream. Because history didn't feel like this. It didn't have a playlist or a safe word. It stank. It bled. It crawled on its knees through alleys while the world pretended not to see. But you don't scream, because the point of gin, then and now, was to mute things. And these people? They've paid well to stay muted. Here's a fringe fact for your final night. In some corners of the medical world, there was a theory that prolonged exposure to gin caused not just damage, but generational memory loss. A kind of inherited fog. Children born with a taste for forgetting. Science moved on from the idea, but you wonder, maybe the gin craze didn't just scar a generation. Maybe it reprogrammed them. You stop at a memorial, new, polished, modest. It doesn't say gin, doesn't mention the craze, just a plaque that reads, "To those lost to hunger, to drink, to indifference. London remembers you, quietly. It's both too much and not enough." You sit on the edge of the Thames as night falls. The water reflects the city in a long, blurry smear, bright on the surface, unknowable beneath. Somewhere nearby, a street violinist plays a slow, haunting tune. You can't place the melody, but it feels like something you've always known. In the distance, Big Ben tolls, London sleeps, London drinks, London forgets. And maybe that's the only way it knows how to live. You take out the bottle you kept, not to drink, just to hold. It's cloudy, cracked at the neck, but still sealed. Inside, the ghost of juniper and poverty. You think about smashing it. You think about drinking it. You do neither. You place it down on the stone beside you. Let someone else decide. You stand, you walk, and for the first time you feel like you're not in a story about gin anymore. You're in a story about people, and the strange, stubborn, beautiful ways they try to stay standing in a city designed to make them fall. You're home now, or at least somewhere that feels enough like home to finally exhale. The noise of the city has faded to a low hum behind you, and in this quieter space it's easier to make sense of what you've just witnessed. 30 nights walking through the long, cracked shadow of the gin craze, and it still lingers in your bones like cold. You stretch out, let your head sink into the pillow, and listen to the familiar creaks of your own room, floorboards shifting, the fan murmuring, maybe a dog barking faintly in the distance. Comforting sounds. Alive sounds. It's strange, isn't it? How something as small as a bottle could warp an entire era, could undo families, start riots, rewrite laws, paint nightmares, and whisper to generations long after the last drop dried on the cobblestones. All of it tied to a spirit clear as water and twice as ruthless. And yet, for all the chaos, there was something achingly human about it all. People didn't drink gin because they were wicked. They drank because they were tired, grieving, frozen by the weight of life's grindstone. And while their choices left wreckage in their wake, it wasn't weakness. It was a kind of survival. Flawed, yes, but honest. So if there's anything to take from this, maybe it's this. Be gentle with the people around you. You never know what they're drinking to forget. And if tonight you sip something yourself, let it be warm. Let it be slow. Let it be a reminder that even in the worst of eras, people still sang, still duandet, still danced in the rain. That somehow they endured, just like you. Now go ahead, close your eyes, let it all drift. You've walked through history's haze, time to voir.